Senator Rennick and Freedom Media organised this wonderful establishment. We thank Kingsway Football Club for putting our people through the door. We thank them for their hospitality. We want to give a warm applause to Senator Rennick. Many of us in Perth, and I say this from the heart, we feel that this man represents our interests, he represents the interests of all Australians, and that's all we ever ask from anyone who sits in Parliament. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over the microphone to Senator Gerard Rennick.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and can I say it's great to be here tonight in Western Australia. I've arrived on Monday. I'm part of a Senate RAT committee inquiry into the closure of banks in regional Australia. So that's the purpose of why I came over to Western Australia, but rather than just come here and not say hi to anyone, I thought the least we could do is get out and talk to my fellow Australians. And it is great to be here in the great state of Western Australia, because without a doubt, without Western Australia, this country would not be the powerhouse that it is. I think Western Australia accounts for 40% of Australia's exports. It's a powerhouse in iron ore, gold, wheat belt, sheep and cattle. So thanks very much to Western Australia, because it's probably fair to say, along with Queensland, my home state, we do the heavy lifting when it comes to keeping this country, head above the water. And it's a shame, because once upon a time there was a great state called Victoria that was the manufacturing powerhouse of Australia. And unfortunately, in the 80s we saw the introduction of neoliberalism, which effectively destroyed manufacturing in Victoria, and all of that in all of the country, but in particular Victoria. And that's had an impact, and that was replaced effectively by the university sector and the superannuation sector. So we went from people who were on the tools, making genuine products and goods, and we always need, any sovereign country needs to be able to actually stand on its own 2 feet and have a manufacturing industry. And unfortunately, we've allowed that to decline to the point now where we have to rely so heavily on imports for much of our manufacturing goods, and that's not good. But I'll talk about that throughout the course of the evening. So what I'll do tonight is I'll split it up into different sections. So I'll talk about why I ran for politics. Then I'll talk about some bread and butter stuff, which may seem boring, but it's very important. So that bread and butter stuff will be tax, monetary policy, and our federation/bureaucracy. And then I'll get on to the red meat stuff, which will be COVID, climate change, and our children. And then I'll take Q&A from the floor for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how we go. And then after that, I'll just hang around for a little while. If people want to talk to me one-on-one, if you don't necessarily want to put questions from the floor, that's fine. I'll hang around for another half hour, an hour after that. So hopefully we'll be finished by about 9 o'clock at the latest. Look, I got involved in politics effectively because I wanted to make sure our children got the same opportunities that our forefathers gave to us. I am incredibly grateful for everything that my parents have done for me, and I'm incredibly grateful for what this country has given me. I was born in 1970, I'm 53 this year, and I feel like I grew up in the golden age in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and I fear that I've seen in the last couple of decades a decline in the standard of living in Australia, or probably what I call an overreach or a creep of government into our daily lives. And I mentioned this in my maiden speech, where I said that for the last 40 years we've seen governments sell the infrastructure that provides essential services. And my view of government's there to serve the people, not control the people. And they've marched on in. They've marched on into the family home, the bedroom, and the classroom, telling our families and individuals how to think. And of course, since that my maiden speech I gave back in September 2019, and of course since then we've now had the government march into our doctors' waiting rooms as well, and basically override our personal health choices. And as well as that, it's become more obvious in the last few years, but this has been on the rise as well, is that we've seen through superannuation, governments march into the corporate boardroom as well. And we've seen this again this week, where we've now got Qantas giving free flights to people who support the ASPO. We see that all the time, where corporations today are driven by ideology and not productivity, and they need to stay out of politics, just as politics should stay out of business. And the other thing is, Australia. Look, I think the story of Australia is something that we should not be ashamed of. I think the story of Australia, certainly modern Australia, is something that we should be incredibly proud of. It's the story of redemption. It's the story of hope. In the 113 years from the time the initial colony arrived, the convicts arrived. They went from a convict colony to and set up one of the great constitutions in the world, that then set the foundation for another 100 years of a fantastic first world country. And that story of perseverance that our pioneering forefathers, went out into the bush and developed this country. I think that that's something we should be proud of, and I'm certainly never going to apologise for that. No one's history is perfect, and look, the story of history is littered with people, movements throughout the world. But I think the way that Australia developed in such a short time, with very little conflict, is something that we should be proud of and should hold on to. Now, the second reason why I got involved in politics is that I want to stand up for Australians who try and stand up for themselves. Ultimately, if you get out of bed every day and put your nose to the grindstone, I want to be there for you, because it's the individual that is the bedrock of democracy, and it is the bedrock of capitalism. I call the capitalist someone who risks their own capital, and that effectively doesn't matter whether you're a teacher or a nurse or a scientist or an engineer or a carpenter or a bricklayer or a small business. If you're out there risking your own capital, whatever sort of capital that might be, whether it's with your hands, with your brain, with your heart, or with your wallet, we are there to look after you. That is the whole point of Western democracy, is to protect the people from the government, not the other way around. Right. And I think that, we've got to, I think the greatest moment in democracy for me personally was in 1776, where the founding colonies in the States actually gave the middle finger back to George III and the British. They said, no, we're not going to be told what to do, we're not going to have taxation without representation, and we're going to have our own currency. So I'll talk a little bit about this later with monetary policy, but there was a 1764 Currency Act whereby the British wouldn't allow the colonies to use their own currency, and of course that was because the aristocrats wanted to maintain control of power, and they basically, I'll explain this more in monetary policy, wouldn't let the founding fathers of the United States, control their own destiny. And it's very important, because that was the manifestation to me, that American Revolution of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was a philosophy, there are a number of philosophers, John Locke, Rousseau, and these guys. But what it turned the traditional world upside down, whereby power and wealth had always been inherited or won by conquest. Whereas with democracy, it empowers the individual and restrains the government, so that individuals can actually aspire to achieve something, not just be a part, if you're a part of a kingdom or a slave or whatever. You can actually become something if you put your nose to the grindstone. And we've really got to protect that. Unfortunately, in this day and age, what we've seen, we think we live in a democracy. I don't believe we do. We've seen the rise of the independent statutory authority, whether it's the ABC, the CSIRO, the Reserve Bank, the TGA, these bureaucrats are rarely ever held to account. And I'm sure many of you have followed my estimates clips where I constantly ask questions and I never get the answers. And whether you're like me as a person, the fact is that we're a representative of the people, and these bureaucrats should be answering those questions, and they don't. But on the other side of the equation, in the private sector, we've actually now got what I call the overhaul or the usurpation of the private assets. So superannuation today, assets under management is about $3.5 trillion. of that 2.7 trillion is under control of the industry funds and the retail funds. And how many people in this room who have a retail or industry fund have ever voted for their board members? Never. Never. That's exactly right. And who funded the sale of that infrastructure? In the last, no, yeah. Well, so in the last couple of decades, who's funded the sale of that? Who's actually bought the infrastructure? It's been superannuation funds and foreign entities, right? But the point is that you were forced, so forget, the vaccine mandate. Long before the vaccine mandate, you had the superannuation mandate. Does anyone know the results of the referendum in 1992 where Paul Keating went to the people and said, by 2025, I'm going to take 12% of your income, I'm going to give it to someone you've never met, and you may or may not get it back when you're 67? Does anyone know what the result of that referendum was? There was no referendum. They just started off at 2%, then they went to 3%, then they went to 4%, and then they went to 5%. They sort of bit by bit took another percent every year. Suddenly you wake up now, and Labor, if they get a chance, will take it to 15%. They've already mentioned it, they've gone quiet on it since I got into politics, but they will go to 15% if you give them a chance. Does anyone know what the result of the referendum in New Zealand in 1997 was? There's a referendum there that asked whether or not people supported compulsory superannuation. Do you know what the result of that referendum was? It was 92% to 8 against compulsory superannuation. Because at the end of the day, it's your money, right? But I'll come back to that in a minute. What I want to focus on though is of that 3.5 trillion, 2.7 trillion is controlled by people that you have no control over, right? If you control $2.7 trillion in capital, you control industry. And if you control industry, you control the media. Because the media relies on advertising from the industry. So now on the one hand we've got a government that we can't control because of these independent statutory authorities and in the public sector, and in the private sector we've now got superannuation, or these companies that are being led not by profitability and trying to make money and looking after their shareholders, etc., but they're driven by ideology. We saw that this week. A lot of companies are spending shareholders' money on the voice. Did they ever ask Qantas, for example, ever ask their shareholders, the individual shareholders, not the fund managers, whether or not they want the voice? Of course not. Alan Joyce came over here, he's on $20 million a year, and he runs his own, he was a hard supporter of the Yes vote again, he was very heavily in that, and runs his own political ideology on the back of other people's money. That is not capitalism, right? That is, well, it's a mixture of socialism / fascism, but that is not capitalism. Okay, capitalism is what, the basis, and I'll talk about markets as well. The basis of markets is the risk-reward paradigm. Those people who risk their capital should be the ones who are rewarded. You can be an executive at a bank, run the bank into the ground, or any company for that matter, and you'll still be paid a golden handshake of $2 million. There's still that defined benefit scheme in Canberra that's valued, excluding the military. These are just the bureaucrats in Canberra I'm talking about. The liability for that's $250 billion. 57. Does anyone remember the results of the referendum that said we were going to pay retired bureaucrats $250 billion? Was there a no? Of course not. It's just ridiculous what these guys have gotten away with. So anyway, long story short, second reason why I ran for politics is that I want to stand up for the people who try and stand up for themselves. And that, of course, is you people out there. It is the individual and the families. And we have to protect you guys from the big end of town, to the bureaucrats, big corporations and the big wealth funds. Because those guys are using your money against you. And that's not right. And the third reason why I ran for politics is that I believe the role of government is to serve the people and not control the people. And we have to get back to actually owning and controlling our sovereign infrastructure. That is our power stations, our dams, our roads, our ports, our airports, and our telecommunications. That is without those sovereign assets in our own hands. And these are monopolies, these things, right? So I don't, think that we should have ever privatised that stuff. Because ultimately, whenever, if an energy market, for example, it goes awry, something goes wrong with it, it's not Macquarie Bank or Energex or who are you guys over here, because Synergy over here, they will be lining up for a bailout. They will get bailed out, right? If anything goes wrong with the power sector, they will get bailed out. Now, in Queensland in the 60s and 70s, Queensland was broke in the late 50s. It was a basket case as a state. But what happened was, and this is the power of infrastructure if you use it properly. So when Joe Bureaucracies was Premier there for 20 years, he opened up the coal basins in central Queensland. He opened up the bauxite deposits in North Queensland, up in Weipa. And from that, just opening up those coal deposits, he started to generate coal royalties. He generated freight charges from the trains. He generated the demurrage charges from the ports. Right? That generated recurring income. That recurring income paid for recurring expenses at schools and hospitals. Okay, you build a toll road, right? We've got toll roads over here at all? No, you don't. Okay, well in Brisbane we've got toll tunnels, right? We've got, tunnels that you pay $5 for to go through, and they're worth it. Trust me, you don't want to get caught in some of the traffic over in Brisbane. But, what's happening today is that the taxpayer, via the state government, is underwriting all the downside risk in constructing those tolls, and then it immediately gets privatised afterwards. So if you look at Brisbane today, 2 million people paying $5 a toll. In 100 years' time, will be 5 million people paying $50 a toll. In Sydney, they just finished off the M4. The New South Wales taxpayer picked up the risk of building it, and they privatised a large part of that the moment it was built. And of course, that means is that all that future upside wealth goes into the private sector's hands. A lot of it's foreign owned, and it goes offshore. That's not what we want. We need to be able to control our own infrastructure, because the recurring income from that infrastructure will pay for the recurring expenses like schools and hospitals. That's very, very important. But governments have sold a lot of their infrastructure, both state and federal, and like all bureaucrats, they become hammers looking for nails. So instead of serving us, they start looking for ways to control us. And of course, we've seen that with all these new rules and regulations, whether it's red tape, green tape, black tape, or blue tape. Okay, we are regulated to within an inch of our lives in so many different ways. So anyway, they're the reasons why I ran for politics. But I'm going to talk about some bread and butter stuff now. It may seem boring, but it's very, very important from the economy point of view. The first issue I want to talk about is our taxation system. Our taxation system is designed to favour foreign capital over domestic capital. Now, when I ran for politics, I didn't just run because I wanted to be a politician. I felt like it added value. The reason why I felt like it added value is when I did a Masters of Tax Law at Sydney University when I worked for Westfield and Sydney in Treasury, and I was shocked at the number of sections in the Tax Act that basically discriminated against Australians. So the first one I'll talk about the section of the Act that just made my jaw hit the ground. It's 128F of the 1936 Tax Act, and it's called the public offer test. So, very Orwellian term, public offer test. You'd think, well, it's something that the public would be offered. But it said the conditions of this public offer test was that if you sell a bond in the primary market, you don't have to pay withholding tax. So, who can sell a bond? What's the minimum parcel for a bond, by the way, if you want to issue a bond in the primary market? $1 million, or it might be $500,000, but I think it's $1 million. So not too many members of the public can just go out in the primary market and issue a bond, right? Who pays withholding tax? Foreigners, right? So basically what that meant was that when we go offshore, when our banks go offshore and lend money from, borrow money from offshore and then lend it on to housing, when they pay interest offshore, right, there's no withholding tax on that interest. So what that means is it's actually in the budget. It costs us about $4 billion, $4.5 billion a year that we give to foreign banks in lieu of tax. They don't pay tax, right? Well, that's not right. Why is it that if any of you guys earn interest on your own bank account have to pay tax on the interest income? Why don't our government set up if we went back to having a public bank, which is what I'm in favour of, have a tax-free interest account for superannuation? We don't have to pay fees or taxes. Why do we give free tax or tax breaks to foreigners for interest income, but not to our own Australians? So that's one part of the Tax Act that I'm trying to get reformed. The second part of the tax is on our withholding tax and our tax treaties. So in Australia, if you're a company or if you're a worker, you're depending on your rate of pay, you'll pay up to 45 cents. Let's just do this for companies. You will pay 30 cents if you earn money onshore, right? So, but because of tax treaties, you will pay if you ship money offshore, if you transfer profits offshore, and you can transfer profits offshore via interest, royalties, rent, license fees, insurance fees, marketing fees. You'll depend on tax treaty, but pay between 0 and 15 cents in the dollar. So what that means is we've got an onshore tax rate of 30 cents and an onshore tax rate of 30 cents, and an offshore tax rate of between 0 and 15. What that means is that will encourage big companies to transfer their profits offshore. Right, so how many people understand what a balance sheet looks like in this room? Yeah, most people. So you've got an asset on this side, on your right side, and on the left side, left side from my angle, asset, and on the right side you've got capital. You've got debt, and you've got equity. Debt, of course, is slavery, equity, of course, is freedom. When we let equity go offshore in the form of profits, so your retained earnings flow down to your equity, we are reducing our equity share in our own wealth here. Right, and as we let equity go offshore because of that stupid withholding tax system that I just described, we then encourage more debt to come onshore because the tax is cheaper. So if you wanted to earn 3.5% income on your interest, you'd have to charge 5%, right? Because you're going to pay 30 cents in the dollar. So you're going to go to the primary market. You're going to go, well, I'll lend you money at 5% because I've got to earn 3.5%. If you're a foreign bank, you'll go, well, I want it, and you want to earn 3.5%, you'll just offer it 3.5%, right? So that not only do we erode our tax base, we're actually attracting more and more foreign debt, of course. And of course, the problem with that is we're going to leave that to our children, and that's not what I ran for politics, and I'm sure that's not what you want your politicians doing, is racking our country up in foreign debt, and then ultimately you'll have to sell that foreign debt. And I'll give you a couple of examples. BHP, well-known Western Australian company, when they bought Billiton 20 years ago, that was widely derided as a crap deal. BHP bought these crap South African assets and based on a return equity basis. And people were like, well, why did BHP do that? And what they did though, when they bought the asset, they came out and said, oh no, we're a big multinational now, we need to be dual listed. Right? Well, I'm sorry BHP, but you've existed for over 100 years in this country and you became the biggest mining country in the world and you never had to be dual listed. But anyway, they went and listed on the London Stock Exchange. Right? And what that meant was that they went and raised money in London, they lent the money to Melbourne, and Melbourne then paid Johannesburg for the assets, the South African assets. But what that did was, it shifted equity out of Melbourne and into London. Right, and they had a loan. So the equity, you might have had $1 billion in equity, it now suddenly became 500 million in equity and 500 million in debt. Then you pay the interest offshore, and as I said, you don't have to pay withholding tax on that. And suddenly BHP are now paying interest offshore that they didn't previously, right? So see how they can use ways, and it's the same, many of you would have been familiar with the iron ore companies and their marketing hubs in Singapore. Remember they had the marketing hubs in Singapore? Singapore's got no iron ore. What would they know about marketing iron ore? Right? We're the biggest iron ore exporter in the world. Why would we need to go offshore to market iron ore? And especially in Western Australia, you pretty much line up with Japan and those countries anyway on a timeline basis. So, what was the big deal? Well, the deal, of course, was that Singapore was offering attractive tax rates. So I'm not sure. I think it was 10%. I'll stand to be corrected. But let's just say the company tax rate in Singapore was 10%, withholding tax rate in Singapore was 15, 10 plus 15 is 25, it's still less than 30. So you've just increased your profit by 5% or reduced your tax by 5 over 30, which is about 16%, by doing a couple of accounting deals. Right? One of the things you'll hear about this is, we can't do that, you'll have double taxation, that's rubbish. And it wasn't me, just bringing the money home, but when money was brought home, when I worked at Westfield, money came home through 4 countries, and the only time it got taxed was when we put a 10% withholding tax on our own retained earnings coming home. So we taxed our own companies, multinational companies, for bringing money home, but we often don't tax foreign multinationals when they ship their profits offshore. This stuff is huge. And it's costing us a lot. There's another really nefarious part of the Tax Act called I forgot what it is now, but it's a 855 of the 97 Act, and it's the non-real asset, non-portfolio, non-real asset exception. So if you hold if you're a foreigner and you own shares in a company and you own less than 10% of that company, and you make a 10% gain on that company, provided it's a non-real asset. So if it's land, it won't work, but if it's shares, it will work. You don't pay any capital gains tax on that. So you could be, you yourselves might earn, get lucky one year, make 50 grand capital gains on your mining shares here in Western Australia. You'll pay capital gains tax on that. If you're at BlackRock or a Vanguard, you own less than 10% of that company, you don't pay capital gains tax. And that even applies to water rights. So I don't even know why we allow foreigners to buy our water rights here, but they won't even pay capital gains tax on the sale of those water rights. So that's not right, okay? So what I want to do is try and lift the level of tax on offshore profits and reduce the level of tax on onshore earnings. Because that way then we retain more equity in our own country. Because we have to stop selling our farm and everything that goes with it, right? Because that belongs to our children. We've got to leave something in the cupboard for them, just like our forefathers left something in the cupboard for us. As a sovereign country, it means we have equity in our assets, not some other foreign country. The other thing is I'm going to do a post on this next week. You'll find this interesting. I got Pfizer's. I only saw my speech in the chamber last week where I got cut off in 14 minutes. So if you look at Pfizer's profits in 2022, they made 1.2 billion in income, and off the top of my head, it was something like 30 or 40 million in net bottom line profit. So they transferred out in costs about 99% of their revenue, so that they had a profit margin of about 2 or 3%. So over the weekend, I went and looked at Pfizer's US report, so their consolidated worldwide reports. In 2022, they had an income of 100 billion, expenses of 70 billion, and made a profit of 30 billion. If I've got those figures right, I think it's 30 billion for the year. So their profit margin was 30%. So does anyone know what's wrong with that? What I've just told you. Why is it? So long story short, is that they have transferred all of their profits offshore, right? Does anyone know how much money in interest, royalties, and rent General Motors paid offshore back to Detroit? No, neither do I, but I know it's enough to make sure they never made a profit here. Because if they made a profit here, they pay 30 cents in the dollar. So they'll find ways to come up with it and ship all their profits. That's pretty much what Pfizer's done. They've got it right down to 3% margin. And guess where? And then you always look for the related party transactions. So, and I'll put this up as a poster, I'll do another speech on the chamber about it. Nearly that entire cost of expenses went to Pfizer, which country? There's 3 major tax haven hubs in the world. Ireland, yeah. Ireland. So Ireland's got a company tax rate of 12.5%. So much cheaper than, much lower than 30 cents. So yeah, most of it went to Ireland. So I'm going to do Google next too, because I think I looked at Google a few years ago and they had similar numbers, like made a couple of billion, nearly shipped all of it offshore, and nearly all of it was shown as a related payment party. So they're just paying. So there are other countries, companies or related party subsidiaries or whatever, interest, royalties, rent, whatever, to shift all their profits offshore. And that's why we need to have a higher offshore tax rate than onshore tax rate, so we stop that from happening. But anyway, I'll finish that. That's tax. So that's what I want to try. That's where I think we need to improve tax. The next thing is our monetary policy. Yet again, monetary policy is the most, I was going to say misunderstood, but I should say least understood policy of government whatsoever, and not just by the people, but by Treasury themselves. And monetary policy is the reason for wars. Controlling the printing press is the reason for wars. What's the saying? We live in a golden age, and he who controls the gold, we wage wars. Whatever. What's that saying?
Golden rule.
Yeah. Yeah, whoever got the gold makes the rules. So whoever, in this case, the gold is the printing press. Let's get to it. So, long story short, in Australia, we effectively only use one lever to deal with monetary policy, and that, of course, is qualitative easing, right? Which is where we change the price of money on the first Tuesday of every month. Who believes in free markets? You do? Do you think we live in the free markets? Because I don't believe in free markets. I don't believe in free markets for the same reason I don't believe in fairies at the bottom of the rose garden. They don't exist. Right? I believe in markets. I believe in fair and efficient markets that reward people who risk their capital. So I believe in the risk-reward paradigm. Right? The moment you take away the risk, I'll stop believing that the people who don't, that's where markets go astray. Now, and that's important because, we have unelected bureaucrats. The last 5 governors now, I'm pretty sure Michelle Bullock started off at the RBA as well, all started off at the RBA, are all RBA careerists who've never worked in the private sector. Guy DeBale, he never became governor, but he did have 6 months with the International Bank of Settlements, and maybe a few others have had experience with other central banks. But we have got unelected officials controlling the price of money every month, and we have seen what we've seen in the last 3 years has been a complete and utter disaster. We saw the RBA panic, push interest rates down to 0.1%. They then went and printed $300 billion, and then paid people to stay at home and do nothing. And then they said they weren't going to raise interest rates until 2024. A lot of people have got 3 year fixed interest rates that are coming off as we speak. And they're rolling on from, say, about 2.7, 2.5 to 3 to 5.5 to 6.5. There's going to be a big mortgage cliff coming, and it's going to cause a lot of pain. Now, there's more than one way. There's 2 other levers that we really need to use when it comes to monetary policy. The first one, the first other lever is quantitative easing, and the third lever is macroprudential measures. So I'll talk about quantitative easing in the first instance. Quantitative easing is where you expand the volume of capital in the system. So come back to your balance sheet. Over here, your asset is 26 million people, times whatever their wealth is, right? Now that is represented on this side of the balance sheet by capital, which is either debt or equity. Right now, there was actually a banking royal commission in 1937. That was the original, and to be honest, the only true banking royal commission. The one we had in 2017 was more to do with the corruption in the banking sector rather than a banking royal commission. But one of the findings of this 1937 banking royal commission was that their finding was that the central bank must always control the volume of money in the system, or volume of credit in the system, and keep an eye on its distribution. So basically what that meant was that they control how much credit is in the system. So in the year 2000, Australia had 20 million people. We've now expanded our balance sheet, or our asset base, by 30%. We've added another 6 million people. So on this side of the ledger, what governments have traditionally done is they have, since 1985 at least, they have expanded the credit, right? They've expanded the debt, right? Rather than expand equity, they've expanded the volume of money by allowing banks to go offshore and buy foreign credit, right? Now that, in my view, is not the right thing to do. I was taught at university, I've got a Bachelor of Commerce, that you cannot print money out of thin air. To print money is reckless. And if you print money, you will cause inflation, right? That is only half the story, right? If you print and spend, if you print money, you will without a doubt create an increase in demand, right? But there's a smart way you can issue credit, right? And that is by securing it against an asset, right, that generates recurring revenue, right? So the asset, so if you're going to print money out of thin air, you've got to do it responsibly, right? So to basically issue credit and then do what the RBA did, print and then give it to people to stay at home and do nothing and spend it, is stupid. That's why we've got inflation now. But the way you do it responsibly is by you build. So if you're going to print money out of thin air, then you need to match it against an asset that comes out of thin air. What's the assets that come out of thin air? Rain. So you build dams to capture the water. Sunlight. Right? Put the water on the soil, and the sunlight will give you crops and give you foliage. And then you also have the soil, and that came out of the air about 4 billion years ago. That was a one-off, but we'll take it. And then you mix those assets with what to give you wealth? What do you mix that with to give you wealth? Labour. Yeah, getting there. There's a particular word I'm looking for. I'm sure you've sung it many times. It's wealth for toil. Okay? So if you go and you want to build a dam or something, and you capture water and then you use that to irrigate, you'll get water supply, you'll get food supply, you can, build a hydro power dam or whatever, you dig up the coal that was put there, millions of years ago, whatever, you create energy. All of that stuff comes from nothing other than your toil. Okay, and that's very important, that's your toil. Now, why does that matter? Because if we go and build a dam for $1 billion, we've got to fund that, right? So there's two ways to raise capital. What are they? You can either issue bonds, which is debt, or you can issue what? Shares. Private companies issue shares all the time. We see it quite often. Why doesn't the government issue shares? Does anyone know why they don't issue shares in equity? Because we're a sovereign country, we have the rights to that rainfall, we have the rights to the sunlight. Why don't we issue shares? Have you ever stopped to think why we borrow money instead of issuing shares? Because I'll tell you what, we've been brainwashed to think that it's printing money. Right? You're not printing money, you're issuing capital, equity, against the untapped wealth. Right? Now, if you've got two sons, you've got two children, and they graduate from school, now if you give them $50,000 each, right, you want them to invest in an asset that's going to generate recurring revenue, right? You don't want them going on a Kentucky trip. Well, you do want them going on a Kentucky trip, but not with the $50,000. Like, you've got to have 4 or 5 years where they work and then have a year off and then maybe, come back home. But the key thing is here is that we should set up an infrastructure bank, the federal government, that lends to the state governments. You can issue a 100-year loan at 1%. They then build the dam. Because we build the dam for $1 billion and we go and borrow money offshore, that means the first $1 billion in wealth we create goes offshore. Right? Bang, $1 billion in wealth just gone offshore. But the problem is because it's debt and because it's infrastructure, it takes a long time to repay the interest and the debt on the infrastructure because the infrastructure often takes 20, 30 years to start. It's the next 100 years after the first 20 or 30 years. So let's say we paid that debt off in 25 years, which has been generous at 4%. That's another 100% interest. That's now another $1 billion in interest that's just gone offshore. Why do we do that? Because we don't think. We allow the narrative of the day, which is that we've always relied on foreign capital. Is it wealth for foreign capital in our national anthem? No, it's not. It's wealth for your toil. Okay, and we've got to retain your toil and the earnings from your toil in this country. Right, now, has this ever been done before in Australia? Who did it? Who? It has been done before. It's actually, who the first guy to actually print money, or should I say equity in Australia was? Lachlan Macquarie. So, the first 17 years of the colony, they relied on foreign currency. There was a drought in 1805, so the currency got repatriated, they started bartering rum. That literally went tits up. And then Lachlan Macquarie was the first governor to come here and had to clean up that mess. And he was the first governor to see Australia as a country and not just a colony. If you're going to have a country, you've got to have a military to provide law and order and to defend your borders. You've got to have a taxation system and you've got to have a monetary system. Right? Every country should have its own currency and not be afraid to manage it correctly. So Lachlan Macquarie brought in the holy dollar, right? The holy dollar in a dump. I'm sure most of you have heard the story of the holy dollar. And he built the Sydney barracks with it, he built the Sydney hospital with it. And he used government credit to basically start building a colony which was built on by Governor Brisbane and so on and so on. So who uses the holy dollar as a logo today? Macquarie Bank. And what's their business model? It's to act, their business model is to act as the middleman on the sale of infrastructure and clip the ticket. So they've got Macquarie infrastructure and all this stuff, right? But the point is that stuff belongs, and they call it the millionaire's factory, and of course they would, because the returns on infrastructure is huge. And they make a very healthy return on equity, but you've got to look at how much they pay out in wages as well. And I think the CEO of Macquarie paid something like $50 million. Does she risk her own capital? No, actually, I'll stand corrected. It's someone else in Macquarie that's paid $50 million. It's actually paid more than the CEO. But yet again, they manage people's superannuation, not directly, but through super funds by using our infrastructure. So long story short, we need an infrastructure bank that will issue credit against the separate sovereign assets, which are dams, power stations, roads, airports, ports, and rail and telecommunications. Right? All you've got to do, state governments build most of those assets, lend the state government a 100-year loan at 1%. They pay, the state government repays that loan in 100 years' time, but pays 1% for the first 100 years. That 1% goes back to the infrastructure bank. You can decide how much of that retained earnings can go back and build more infrastructure, so you won't even need to, eventually need to even issue new credit, because your credit will be generated by retained earnings. Right, this is what happened in Queensland under Joe. By the end of it, I mean, we had the cheapest power in the world. We had more universities opened up. We had that much money coming from the bauxite deposits and the coal deposits. We got ourselves out of debt and started building schools and roads and bridges and all this stuff, right? If we're generating that much wealth in your earnings, you won't even need to issue capital. But of course, what business model would we kill if we started to retain our own earnings?
All of them.
But in particular, not all of them, there's the banks. That's exactly right, the banks. Okay, because right now, what's the biggest market in the world? No, the particular commodity. It's the US dollar bond market. Right, who prints that? Federal Reserve. Who owns the Federal Reserve? Private banks. We don't really know who owns it, but it's not the American people either. So we shouldn't be really calling that the US dollar. We should be calling it the private, banking cartel dollar. Right? What's interesting about the history of that is that after World War II, the Bank of England was actually nationalised, and England got stuck with all the debts, or Great Britain got stuck with all the debts after World War II. I don't know how many people actually realise that. And I'm not sure if the German bank was nationalised after World War I, but the British had to took them 60 years to repay the debt. And the big risk is that one day they're going to want to nationalise the US bank, right? Or not the US bank, sorry, the Federal Reserve. And then some other country will then be given the rights to print that money and lend it to everyone else in the world. What was interesting is a few years ago there was a big football with Dan Andrews was going to borrow money from the Chinese for the Belt Road. Now, what annoyed me about that was that we've been borrowing other countries' currency for years. Why don't we actually issue our own currency, retain our own earnings in our own country? Now, the third lever about monetary policy is macroprudential measures. In 1985, Paul Keating got rid of all capital controls, and it was hailed as free markets, open markets, yada yada yada. How good is this? In 1985, the four major banks had $8 billion in foreign debt. By 2008, they had $800 billion in foreign debt. In other words, they borrowed an additional almost $800 billion from offshore. Now, who did they lend that? What did they lend that money against? Your houses, right? So what did that do? They inflated the price of a house from 4 to 5 times earnings to 12 to 13 times earnings. And what did that do? That sent two parents back to work. And what did that do? That drove Australia's education standards down the world rankings, right? And as well as that, we've got Labor now pushing the voice. We see the voice in childcare centres. We see all these issues going on, right? Now, I don't care who goes back to work, but you can't tell me, logistically, I try and help my wife out as much as possible, but running your kids around to school and everything like that is a full-time job, right? And if you want to make sure, I don't know if you've ever done magic words, there's 100, anyone knows magic words, anyway, long story short, I try and read to my children, because I know the teacher can't do it all, right? The teacher's got 20 to 30 people in a classroom, children in a classroom. The teachers can't physically get to everyone all the time to give them all the attention they need. I'm pro teachers. I think they do a fantastic job. But parents have to help the teacher. And if we don't have a parent at home, I had 3 years or 4 years at home just before I came into the Senate actually. If you're at home, you get involved with the school P&F. So if you don't see, so when I was president of the school P&F, I got a text message one day from the prior president from the prior year with a photo of a glass window on a classroom with the sorry sign on it. And of course I knew, we're on the same wavelength here, so I knew what it was. And basically our children were told they had to say sorry. They're being taught this stuff in schools. So I went up and, I was, in my president's or chair or whatever I was, the P&F, I said, look, our children don't have to apologise for something that's happened in the past, right? This is not, our children are not going to, bear the sins or the guilt of alleged crimes in the past, right? I do not want, so long story short, I'll come back to monetary policy, but you can see how monetary policy starts to affect social policy, right? The ultimate freedom, and the other thing, of course, I'll touch on superannuation again, is, you come out, our children today go in, 30, 40 years ago with the button plan, for example, we had this button plan that was going to rationalise manufacturing, and maybe to an extent it was needed, but we rationalised it to the extent now we basically drove our manufacturing industry offshore. Now what that means is, and we're coming to the end of this cycle now, where those guys who were tradies in the 70s and 80s did their apprenticeship, they're all retiring now. So now we've got high immigration to pull in all the people that have got trades from offshore, because all our children now have been, courtesy of the Dawkins plan in 1990, that said everyone should go to university and get brainwashed by Marxists for another 3 or 4 years, right? And then they graduate and they come out brainwashed and broke because they've now got a head start, right? So can you see how we are loading our children up with not just our national debt, but personal debt, and a lot of the skills there. Look, there's a role for universities. Roles like engineering and medicine and law matter, like we do need, skills in those things, but whether or not we need 40% of the populated children or 40 to 50% of our children spending another 4 years at university doing certain degrees in certain, sports management. Sports management is effectively going down to your sporting field on a Tuesday night with a key, opening up the key to the sporting shed and turning the lights on, right? Shouting at the kids for a couple of hours. That's where it starts again, right? Love the sport, but let's not, get carried away with it. So anyway, back to the monetary policy. So that second lever is, the third lever of macroprudential. The other thing is you have macroprudential and microprudential. Things like allowing people, only putting 5% deposit down on their mortgage. We really need to keep that at 20, 30%. I realise it's hard, but house prices have gone through the roof. Other things is, we say to banks, if you're going to, for every dollar you lend out against housing, you've got to lend $1 to business first. Just today in this banking inquiry, Bank West told us today, they are shutting down their business branches here in Western Australia. They're only going to do retail. They started off as a state-owned agricultural bank, and they are turning their back on business in Western Australia. I think that's a complete and utter disgrace. Well, there you go. Commonwealth Bank bought out Bank West in 2008, right? Which was, Bank West was originally a state bank, agricultural bank. And CBA was in a strong enough position to do that because it was originally a public bank, right? And of course it was underwritten in the GFC just like it was underwritten in COVID, right? So yet again, this is what I mean by these big corporations. They're relying on, the generosity of the taxpayers to always underpin their success. But long story short, so we need to get much more innovative with our monetary policy. It needs to be not just qualitative easing, but should be quantitative easing in a constructive, productive manner. Because what the RBA are doing in the last 4 or 5 years is that we've had an inflation shock. Now that's where demand's gone higher than supply, or supply's dropped off. Now in my view, we've got a bit of both because they printed $300 billion and told everyone the state only had an increase in demand. But over the years, we've had a decline in productivity and hence supply because we've lost our skilled sector. We now rely on everyone else. So, for various reasons, we've dropped in supply. But what the RBA are trying to do is trying to impose austerity by reducing demand. It's raising interest rates to reduce demand. Why should, that is incredibly cruel to impose austerity against hard-working people who've done nothing wrong. And that's not the way forward. The way forward is to increase supply through increasing productivity. And the way you increase productivity, we often hear this, we've got a productivity crisis, yada, 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 is to build infrastructure that builds, more dams and more power stations, pushes down the price of energy. If you push down the price of energy and have more water, you'll get more, crops. You'll get cheaper energy, more goods and services, will become more competitive. And another thing I'd like to do with taxation, I'll just jump back to that, is I would like to bring back stamp duty on share trading to get rid of payroll tax. Because it is absolutely insane to tax employers to employ people. Right? Now, 40 to 50% of the market is owned by foreigners. If you buy a house, you pay stamp duty. If you buy a farm, you pay stamp duty. If you buy a business and the land, sits on a block of land, you pay stamp duty. But you can be a foreigner, scalping the market every day and pay no stamp duty. I would rather bring back stamp duty and then use that to get rid of payroll tax. And even for the big companies like BHP or CBA, you might like paying your stamp duty as a one-off, but you will get that back very quickly in increased dividends from the fact that they will now have greater profits, and I'll pay that out as dividends. So you'll get your money back many times over if we did that. But more importantly, we'd be more competitive. So how do we be more productive? As I said, cheaper energy, cheaper water, lower payroll tax, get rid of payroll tax, and then also if we can lower taxes across the board, including income tax, we can be more productive. Now the last part of this comes back to productivity as well, is we have to fix our federation and our bureaucracies. We have got, and I touched on this in my main speech, we have got 8 health departments, 9 health departments in this country. We've got 6 states, 2 territories and 1 federal health department. Now I'm from a small town of Chinchilla, Western Queensland, about 280 kilometres west of Brisbane. Population of 8,000 people, doesn't have a maternity ward. When I grew up there, it had a maternity ward, had 4 midwives, one of which was my mother. And today, 30 years later, despite the fact that it's twice as big, it's the centre of a gas boom there. And we've got Coburn Creek Power Station, which was being built there in 2000, I think. We get nothing back for it. Labor, when they got in the early 90s, after Joe got kicked out, introduced poker machines. We do have poker machines. In the last 30 years, I've seen my small town that I grew up in lose its maternity ward, lose its Shire council. So we've got 8,000 people in the town and probably 10,000 people in the Shire. We've lost our council. My dad was a 3rd generation councillor, but we've got poker machines. And that pretty much sums up the level of service. I know WA is in a better situation, you don't have poker machines. And you're a very good reason. You're fairly happy state, never needed poker machines. I can get rid of those things tomorrow if I could help it. Hate things, but we need to fix up our bureaucracy because it is killing us. And we need to get rid of, there's things like, there's 2 ways. We need a constitution, we need a federation convention. There's some things you might have to change the constitution, but there's other things you don't need to change the constitution. So, for example, with the federal roads, there's this 80-20 funding split, right? Why do the federal government put 80% into federal roads, wait for the state government to put in 20%, and get the state government to use Spanish, I think the Spanish ones, the tier 1 building contractors, to build their federal roads? Why don't we, in the same way if you go to, you want to become an officer in the army, you've got to go to Duntroon and get a degree. Why don't we get people in the army to go into either an engineering corps, along a civil engineering corps or a mechanical engineering corps, as a part of their training in the military? And that way then when they come out of the military 20 years later, if they don't want to leave the military, some people do, some people don't, our vets can go back into the civil engineering corps, as a way to deal with their mental health issues as well. But, yet again, I know Eisenhower built a lot of highways to keep, the veterans busy after World War II. I just do not know why we need 2 levels of government to build our highways. It's just madness. I don't know what it's like over here, but in Queensland, our Premier plays games all the time with trying to milk the federal government for that last 20%. Or she argues, it's not, and then she'll try and say this is a federal highway. It's a nightmare. We can never get anything done because we've got the state government fighting the federal government. Yet again, education. We've got a duplication of education. Why do we have a national curriculum? I would much rather push education back down because we do not want the bureaucrats in Canberra writing a curriculum up that says all mining is bad, all agriculture is bad. These people bite the very hand that feeds them. Yet again, in health, we saw this finger pointing and saying, it's not the federal government imposing mandates, it's the state governments. 23A says that we're responsible for the provision of medical benefits, right? If we've got the TGA, federal regulatory body that regulates medicine, then, we've got, and federally we do Medicare, we do private health, we now do NDIS, and we do a lot of aged care. And yet state governments do public hospitals. Yet again, pick a side. I'd happily take education and push that down because we want a genuine competition of ideas. But I'm not against having a funding health federally and then pushing it down to your local area board. So I'm not sure how it works in Perth, but in Brisbane we've got Metro North, Metro South, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, and having, just letting those areas control their own health rather than have the state government get interfered because it's just enough. You're only 26 million people, so we have so much interference from so many different levels of government. So anyway, look, I'll leave that there in terms of issues I think we need to deal with our federation as well. But just the way forward, some of the policies that I push in the party room and amongst my colleagues and people when I talk is I actually want to raise the tax-free threshold to $40,000 or $50,000. It's currently at $18,200. My view is if businesses get a tax deduction for the cost of doing business, I don't know why people can't get a tax deduction for the cost of living. I think it's incredibly cruel and unproductive to tax someone on $50,000. If you're on $50,000, you'll pay about $6,000 tax, plus you'll pay soon to be 12% superannuation. So, I don't know what it's like in Perth, but I'd say you'd be lucky to live on $50,000 a year. Why do we tax people on incomes less than that? And I mean, maybe we couldn't quite get to 50, but I think we can get to 40 without costing the budget too much, because people on those low incomes will spend everything they make. And one thing under the Harry Costello years is that they cut income tax every year, and they got the budget back in a surplus. I know you ride a bike, Wayne. You all know that lower gears, higher cadence, you'll go faster than a higher gear and lower cadence. Right, same for a tax rate. When we have such high tax rates, 20 cents, once you earn more than $18,000, about 20-cent tax rate plus 50 cents if you're on the dole, and you start coming off, you lose 50 cents for every dollar you earn, plus 12% super, suddenly it's 20 plus 50 plus 12, that's 82 cents in the dollar. We need to lift that so we get people, we want them to get out of bed and put their nose to the grindstone every day, so we've got to do that. The other thing I'd like to do is pay childcare directly to the parents and let them choose the type of childcare that they want. Some people may not, some parents that might be the difference between the parent going, the second parent going back to work or not. They may want the grandparents to look after the child. They may only need to pay a nanny for 3 hours a week. You may have workers here on fly in, fly out, where one parent is on their second, every second week they've got a week off at home. Why do they have to pay childcare for that week? What about all the shift workers like our nurses and policemen, people who work in hospitality? They can't pick their child up at 6 o'clock at night. They may only want to pay for childcare, a nanny between 6 and 10 at night. So, by forcing our children into childcare, I get some parents have to do it, and I'm not referring to kindergarten, just to be clear. I went to kindergarten. I'm not against the 5-day fortnight once they turn 4 as a step up into school. But, ideally when they're in those younger years, it's the best years of your life. I was fortunate enough to stay at home and raising your children and hanging out in the park and eating ice cream, and it's something that you'll never regret if you do it. I might add too, the fastest growing union in Australia is United Voice. That's back on the back of the childcare industry. So you've got 150,000 or 200,000 childcare workers paying $800 a year. That's over $100 million into the unions. Thanks very much. Another way to tick it on the back of our children. And the third thing is I'd like to do is to make superannuation optional. I think it's your money. I think superannuation is wage debt. It's not doing what it was designed to do. In 1992, when Paul Keating introduced superannuation, 50% of retirees were on a full pension. And today, 50% of retirees are still on a full pension. The number of retirees on a part pension has dropped from 27% to 21%. And of that 6% drop, 3% of it was when Morrison, when he was Treasurer, changed the thresholds to get a full pension. So that barely reduced, in over 30 years now, superannuation has barely reduced the number of people on a pension. Now, despite that, the cost of running superannuation is $30 billion a year. Another $50 billion is tax concession is handed out to them. And most of that goes to the upper 25%, because they're the ones that pay the highest rate of tax. And the full cost of the pension is about $53 billion for the bottom 75%. So, yet again, if you got rid of super, you've got $50 billion just there in tax concessions that you can hand out in a number of ways. You've got 14 million workers, 4 million retirees, and 3 million small business, so 20 million people could all get a $2,000 tax cut. So that would raise the tax rate. That would pay to raise the tax rate threshold to 30,000, just like that, at no cost. But that would empower people to pay off their homes faster. And if you want to save for your retirement, if I have my way, let's get a public bank back. And that's something I think we desperately need. We've seen that with banks closing their branches in the regions. We had a public bank. We could offer banking services that instead of giving, as I mentioned before, with foreign banks getting interest-free, tax-free interest, Why not pay that to people who want to put into a retirement account? This is your retirement account. We'll pay you 2% above the RBA cash rate, and we'll cap it at 4% on the way down. We'll put a floor on that 4%, so you'll be guaranteed 4% tax-free. You can sleep at night. You know, a lot of retirees don't want to wake up in the morning with their fingers crossed, waiting for the Dow Jones to crash. That's been too bad in the last 10 years, but throughout that GFC, a lot of people had their super wiped out in a matter of months. You know, Storm Financial, and there are a lot of other companies that went under as well. So, you know, there's other ways that we can help people have a healthy retirement other than force them into superannuation, which only basically enables those people in Sydney and Melbourne, you know, working in those ivory palaces who are getting up to $30 billion a year in fees. So the Productivity Commissioners set the cost of superannuation at $30 billion a year, and that was about 5 or 6 years ago that report came out. I mean, but I think we spend a bit more on the military now, but that's the sort of numbers we're talking about. It's huge. And we've now got a whole battalion of financial engineers and I'm an accountant, so, but, you know, I'm happy to do business services where we're doing tax returns and we're helping people with their loans, whatever, but I just think some of the financial engineering that goes on today in superannuation is over the top, and we need to simplify the system, because it's not helping those people who really need it at the bottom of the scale, which is the whole point of designing it. So anyway, there's some ideas for the way forward as well. And anyway, I'll get on to the red meat issues. What do you want to talk about first, COVID or climate change? Yeah, just, this is where we start having fun tonight. But, or maybe Anthony. I get frustrated when I talk about this topic. Yeah. Okay, well let's start with COVID. Just as a matter of interest, you may find this interesting. I actually own shares in an mRNA technology company a few years ago called Bureaucracies. And it was looking at a cure or trying to reduce stage 3, stage 4 cancer. And the whole idea of it was to actually, getting the cell to survive just a little bit about it without actually damaging the rest of the system. And I've invested in many biotechs over the years, and I've never made any money out of any biotechs. And that's because I'm a very impatient investor, and most grassroots biotechnology companies just never get off the ground. And if they're any good, they'll get snapped up very easily. And interestingly enough, with Bureaucracies, I sold out, not because it was a bad company, it was actually coming out with very good results. It was because the volatility in the price went dead. And I knew the moment the volatility went dead in the price, that the price was being manipulated. And long story short, about 6 months later, after I got bored and sold out, it got taken over by Merck Roche, I think it was. And they made Habitat, and it was going to be used with Keytruda or something like that. So, for those watching it through live streaming, and I'm sure there's some lefties just waiting there for a gotcha moment. I'm not anti-technology whatsoever. Now, I also studied biochemistry in the science degree in my early 30s, not for very long, because I had to go back and work, wanted me to do something work-related, so that's how I started on my Master's in Finance. But, so I had a little bit of an understanding about biotechnology, and I read a really interesting article by a bloke called Ian Fraser, who I think, if he wasn't Australian of the Year, he was certainly Queenslander of the Year, and it was in the ABC in April 2020. And he said it's very difficult to get a vaccine for an upper respiratory tract infection. They've been looking for a vaccine for many, many years, and they hadn't been able to find one. And I sort of tucked that away in my brain. I don't know why, I guess because I had an interest in biotechnology. But anyway, long story short, you have 3 types of pathogens. You have bacteria, you have double-stranded DNA, and you'll have single-stranded viruses. Right, so double-stranded DNA viruses, like something like smallpox, pretty much hasn't changed since the time Edward Jenner found a vaccine for it back in the late 1790s. You'll have bacteria. Most of the vaccines you'll get will be for bacteria-related disease. So, your tetanus shot, for example, that's inside your blood. And then you'll have a single-stranded virus. So they are MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, polio, single, double-stranded. And of course, COVID, your coronavirus and single-stranded viruses. Now, within that, you then have your immune system, you have your mucosal system, which is, all the stuff around here, your snot, your tears, all that sort of stuff. And then you have your blood, which is your systemic system as well. Predominantly speaking, the antibody A controls your mucosal system, antibody G controls your blood system. Most of all, your systemic immune system. The idea that you were going to put a vaccine into your blood and then get it to stop transmission was highly unlikely. And I was basing that off the article that I read about Ian Fraser, and also Robert Clancy said that it's very difficult as well. He's a well-known, respected immunologist, Australian immunologist. So when, and I want to get back on the lockdowns as well, because this isn't just about the vaccines. But long story short, when it came out just after Joe Biden was elected, that suddenly these pharmaceutical companies, after 40 years of searching, 3 different pharmaceutical companies had all found a vaccine for a coronavirus that was going to work, I was sceptical. But at the same time, especially given that Joe Biden has just become president and I've been keeping an eye on his machinations for the last 20 years, he goes right back to when Clarence Thomas was put on the Supreme Court and he tried to stitch Clarence Thomas up over Anita Hill. And there's a famous clip there where right at the start of it you'll see a much younger Joe Biden, and Clarence Thomas is pretty much, he was I think the leader of the committee that was investigating Clarence Thomas at the time. But yeah, interesting character. Anyway, early on I thought, well, you know, I didn't know that it was necessarily going to be any adverse events. And, you know, I figured, well, so many people have been sort of, however, you know, terrified or whatever from the daily press conferences from the state premiers that I knew a lot of people wanted to take the vaccine and you're never going to talk them out of it. And I figured, well, you know, if it helps get us through one season, people take it, if it's going to open up, whatever. So, long story short, I think the rollout started February, March 2021. You know, there was a lot of pressure put on politicians. I mean, I was asked a number of times by Tom Connell whenever I went on Skype I was going to take the vaccine. I said, look, I'm not going to tell you and I'm not going to tell people what to do. You know, if you're worried about coronavirus, go and see your doctor. If you want to take the vaccine, take it. If you don't want to take it, don't take it. I'm not telling you what to do. But it became very evident in October 21 that there was a problem with the vaccine in terms of injuries. And that was, we just called, by the way, I'm working out what that shit was about. What's that, sorry? Yeah, yes, yeah. And the first person I ever heard from was actually a Western Australian policewoman by the name of Chantal Uren. And her story, 37-year-old, went and got a Pfizer jab, pretty sure it was the first year, it wasn't the first one, and then immediately felt ill afterwards, and I'm going to give you a very brief rundown here, so apologies to Chantal if I'm not getting this exactly right, but she went to see the doctor quite a few times over the next couple of weeks and ended up having a stroke, and went to hospital, and then she went to hospital a number of times, and she also had an operation around the midriff somewhere. I know she was on a potassium drip. She has slowly recovered her health. I don't know that she's 100%, but you know, it didn't break her. But I'll tell you what, you know, I know that she was vilified by the West Australian Police Force and gaslighted. Her injury was gaslighted. But her story became, I posted her, in 1 week I posted her story, another story of an 18-year-old girl in New South Wales who had clots on her lung, and then there was another person as well. Oh yeah, and another Queensland guy whose story I didn't post straight away. He was a 30-year-old man, went and got the jab Friday night, was ill over the weekend and was paralysed down his right-hand side in the hospital by the following Tuesday. And when I spoke to him 6 weeks later, he was still in hospital, paralysed down his right-hand side. His partner had a young child. His mother was paying off their mortgage, and I think the mother was on a pension. And he was worried about getting his job back. And I said, well, look, have you had any, you know, contact from the authorities? He said, yeah, Queensland Health has called me and told me to get a second jab. And he said, and I said, well, and he said, I told him, well, actually, I've been paralysed from the first one, and I'm still paralysed in hospital down my right-hand side. And I said, it doesn't matter, you've still got to get a second jab. Yeah, can you believe that? And that's where, you know, the alarm bell was starting to go off, because I was like, this isn't right. And also financially, the vaccine indemnity scheme wasn't going to open up until the following year. And I spoke to Matt third week of October, so he had to wait months before he was even going to get any financial compensation. And that's, so I posted a couple of stories, and it just, the floodgates just opened. I was probably receiving over 1,000 emails and messages in my inbox every day. The phones were off tap for right through till probably March, April the following year, when we still get calls. The bulk of our calls are still around this particular issue, even though we get plenty of other issues as well. And I know you all know the story. We've been trying to fight for justice ever since. But it's been out of control. But we'll come back to the vaccines in a minute. But I just want to go back to the initial, the initial start of COVID and what I call the propaganda and just the whole brainwashing phase. Now, for what it's worth, I know not all of you agree with me. I think there's a virus or a pathogen out there that made people sick. But we've got so many questions that need to be asked. We need to find out whether or not it was made in a laboratory. The fact that Anthony Fauci seemed to think that initially it wasn't and tried to cover it up, there needs to be questions asked about that. Because that matters, because we cannot have our researchers engaging in gain of function without any accountability whatsoever and without sufficient controls. We need to ask why Anthony Fauci said in January 2017, the day before Trump's inauguration at Georgetown University, that there will be an unexpected respiratory outbreak. Because not only do we need quality assurance with our gain of function research, if at all, I mean, I'm sceptical we even need to do it, but we also need to know if that was used for the wrong purposes. We then need to look at why we locked down and we didn't look at the real data. So, as I said, I think there's a pathogen. I think it makes people sick. I think that older people are vulnerable, and by all means, we have to look after our vulnerable, our older people, and our sick people. But I not for a minute think that we should have locked down healthy people of working age population and subjected them to those daily press conferences from the media. There was one state at 9 o'clock, another state at 10 o'clock, another state at 11 o'clock, another state at 12 o'clock, back to back to back to back, just, saturation of fear-mongering with COVID. That was completely irrational, it was completely emotional, and, as I said, I think it was a risk for older people, and by all means, we could have done things there, but you don't destroy the weak by protecting the strong, and that's exactly what happened. Western Australia, you had Mark McGowan, he was out of control. We had Anna Palaszczuk, she was out of control. Ridiculous things. There was COVID in the sewage. She wouldn't let, a mother from New South Wales use Queensland Hospital. She was saying ridiculous things like the virus will hunt down the unvaccinated. Dan Andrews was locking children out of playgrounds. They had two. So those lockdowns, the first 18 months in itself was very, very bad and overeaten. Yet again, there's more questions over the PCR testing. Why was the cycle threshold set to 40? What was the actual primer used? There's 29,000 nucleotides in that virus, 29 proteins. We need to know what the primer was used, so how long the length of that sequence that they used and what that sequence was to determine what was a positive COVID test, and whether or not that sequence was also common to other coronavirus sequences, and whether or not it was actually synthesised by our own body as well. I'm waiting on answers back from TGA about that. I want to know exactly what that was.
We're watching, brother.
So there's issues over the way it was tested. There's issues over the way, the RBA printed $300 billion and paid people to stay at home. There's that issue as well. There's issues over national cabinet. I do not like national cabinet. I think you elect a federal government and it should be the federal government in conjunction with the normal federal cabinet. So, government of the day plus ministers. Look, obviously, I'm slightly being partisan, but I try not to be. But when Morrison created a national cabinet, he effectively elevated mostly Labor premiers and then pushed out the Liberal ministers. And my view was, well, no, federal government should be running federal government. Now you've got this executive without a parliament, right? And, there's just too much say, in my view, with that national cabinet. I do not like it, and I do not like the way the state premiers did what they did. So yet again, we need to hold them to account. So that, you know, then there were the lockdowns, the lockouts. You know, sportsmen were allowed to fly in and out, you know, if you're an entertainer, but, you know, poor old Battler was told you have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine and here's a $10,000 bill. You know, loved ones were unable to see, you know, their families were unable to say goodbye to their loved ones. I know many people who were unable to be at their, you know, their sisters or their brother's deathbed. And, you know, I mean, my mum's passed away, and I'm telling you, if anyone stopped me from going to my mother's deathbed, like, good luck. Right, like that had ever happened to me. That was a violation of human rights. At one point there, we were stopping Australian citizens from coming home and threatening jail. Palaszczuk locked out thousands of Queenslanders in November and December 21. Despite the fact she wouldn't let them do a COVID test, well, they should have been allowed to come home anyway, regardless. But even ones who didn't have COVID weren't allowed to come home. So we had thousands of Queenslanders on the border, and I dare say it's the same thing with, you know, Western Australians trying to come back here. You know, who couldn't get back in living in tents or living in the back of cars. Just insanity. So all of that stuff needs to be reviewed, and, you know, people need to be held to account for that. And you know, look, you know, yeah, we'll leave it at that. And then obviously with the vaccines, we've got the fact that people were coerced into taking the vaccine, the fact that there wasn't sufficient testing, the vaccine, the fact that these drug makers have been given indemnity, and it seems very obvious they didn't do proper testing. They've gaslighted about the injuries. We haven't got medical support for these people, and they're still pushing the jabs now, despite that we know, you know, we had excess deaths in 2021 when there was no COVID. We had excess deaths, you know, by 30,000 people in 2022 when, yes, there was COVID, but there was also, you know, half of that was not related to COVID, and even the COVID deaths are short comorbidities related to comorbidities.
All of them.
You know, so there are so many questions that need to be answered and addressed, so this never happens again. And what I'll do is, I mean, I'll leave it at that, but I'll take questions from the floor, and I'll let you talk about that. Look, the one thing about COVID, not that anything good about COVID, but I think it made people look at what's going on in other areas, because if the government was going to, you know, weaponise a virus to terrify people and lock them down, the government would do it on other issues as well. We saw that with Brittany Higgins, what happened there. The Albanese opposition at the time weaponised the rape allegation and sensationalised that particular issue. And I don't know what happened that night. I'm not going to say who was right and who was wrong. But I was in that chamber when your own Western Australian Senator Linda Reynolds was effectively bullied for 8 days straight in question time. And at the end of that question time, Brittany Higgins then went to press charges. Right, so that effectively they ran it through the media, and that should never have been run through the media, and it should never have been run through the Senate, but they ran it through the Senate, and that was a complete abuse of power, in my view. So, you know, they're going to weaponise rape, they will weaponise the weapon. Okay, now they're weaponising race with the voice. I mean, I'm sure the question will be voted here, but obviously I'm voting no to the voice. There's only one race, the human race. And there's only... and of course, sorry, which leads me into they're recognising the weather. And every time there's an event now, it's being blamed on climate change. And of course, the problem... Yeah, so climate change is yet again, you know, we'll be very clear about this. I care about the environment, right? I'm a protectionist. Okay, I mean, I call myself the last protectionist of the Liberal Party, but I'll give a shout out to my mate Luke Howard, who's a legend. He's a member for P3. He's on board as well. And the original Liberal Party was actually started by the protectionists. The first two Prime Ministers of Australia were Deakin and Barton, or Barton and Deakin. They were the protectionist party. They merged with the Free Trade Party in 1905. Robert Menzies, if you ever read the Forgotten People's speech, the last paragraph says we should not go back to the old selfish notions of laissez-faire. Right? I believe in markets, but I believe in fair and equitable markets and productivity, because our freedoms are a child of affluence, right? And that affluence comes from hard work. That's how we get there. That's hard work comes from making sure we encourage all you guys, the individuals, that you're rewarded for your toil. But anyway, so back to climate change. I'm sure I've been on another part. Oh, I think environment. So yes, I do care about the environment. When it comes to cleaning up plastic, when it comes to protecting our biodiversity, when it comes to like land management, making sure we keep grass in the ground. You know, we don't let the trees kill out all the grass. Whatever it might be, in terms of protecting the environment, all for it. But when I do not believe in climate change, it has no definition. All science is underpinned by mathematics. Right? If you look at Einstein, E equals mc squared. Max Planck equals hp. Right? You've got to, basically, knowledge. The three major schools of epistemology, the study of knowledge, is rationalism, empiricalism, and skepticism. Right? Rationalism is you have a rational conversation. There's a rational idea. Empiricalism is very important. Is where you take observations and you demonstrate cause and effect, and you quantify that cause and effect. Hence algebra and calculus. That's why you do math science at school. You talk to most science students who go on the university level, and most of their science degree will be mathematics. So the question is, what is the algorithm for climate change? Is there an algorithm, or are we just going to rely on modelling? Yeah. Because I'm an accountant, right? So my arch nemesis in the finance world are economists, right? I hate economists, right? Because they model stuff, but they never help account. As an accountant, if I'm signing off on auditing a balance sheet, and I say there's $1 million in a bank account, I've got to have a bank statement that says there's $1 million, and then if I get audited, then the auditors will ring up the bank and say, does this Joe Blow have $1 million in his bank account, right? You've got to prove, you've got to be precise, right? I've got to reconcile accounts, right? Economists, models don't have to do that. Who else models data? Epidemiologists, yeah. Epidemiologists, right? Who's driving the COVID hysteria? Epidemiologists, right? Paul Kelly, the current CHO, Chief Health Officer, epidemiologist, right? Not a front-end surgeon or someone like that. Wasn't in the ward. No, he's sitting there with his balance sheet predicting 100,000, 50,000 people are going to die from COVID. And still can't get his numbers right. If you saw one of my recent posts just this week, when I held him to account and called him out on it, he just tried to deflect. Right? Modelling is not science. Intimidation is not science. Indoctrination is not science. Okay? Empiricalism, rationalism, and skepticism is, and it's the mathematics that underpins it. Now, what's the algorithm? What is CO2, by the way? Yeah, what is it? It's a gas. So what's the algorithm that describes the relationship between gas and temperature? The ideal gas law. PV equals nRT. Pressure by volume equals N, which is the number of molecules. R, which is the ideal gas constant. And T, the temperature expressed in kelvins. Right? So the temperature of the Earth currently in kelvins is what? 287 degrees. 15 degrees Celsius plus 272 degrees kelvins, right? So if you go and add 100 parts per million to the atmosphere of CO2, right, because temperature is directly related to pressure, right? Pressure, it comes from all gases in the atmosphere. We know that because the temperature on Venus is 93 times hotter than the temperature on Earth. And the pressure of the atmosphere in Venus is 93 times higher than the pressure of the atmosphere on Earth, right? It's related to pressure. And that matters because carbon dioxide is only a trace gas. So if we add another 100 parts per million, million's 10 to the 6, 100's 10 to the power of 2, 10 to the 6 over 10 to the power of 2, 10 to the power of 4, 10,000. 287 times divided by 10,000 is 0.0287 degrees. So for every 100 parts per million, you'll increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, you'll increase the temperature by 0.03 degrees. So within margin of error. So in order to decrease the temperature by a degree, you'd have to add about 3,300 parts per million of CO2. And you've got to remember though that the Earth, like the plants and everything, will suck up a lot of that. So it's going. I mean, we basically brought 6 billion people, industrialised 6 billion people in the last 150 years, and added 100 parts per million. To, assuming that everything we're told is correct, I'll go with the increase the CO2 bit to 420 parts per million. But if we're going to increase the temperature by 0.03 degrees to bring 6 billion people out of poverty, I'll take that any day. Okay. But just a little bit more about this. So, energy equals mc squared. Where's our energy come from? Sun. 600 billion tonnes of hydrogen is fused every second into 596 billion tonnes of helium and 4 billion tonnes of energy. that comes to the Earth. Some of that comes to the Earth in the form of electromagnetic energy, which is carried through the boson known as a photon. Right? How many people have actually tried to surf in this room? It's not easy, is it? In order to surf, catch a wave, you've got to be on the same wavelength as the wave. You've got to be swimming in the same, paddling in the same direction with about the same speed. You'll be on the same wavelength. Well, guess what? Every little molecule, so CO2 has, oxygen and then 2 carbon atoms. 2 oxygen and 1 carbon atom, CO2, sorry. They all vibrate at a certain frequency, and all molecules have certain vibrational frequencies. Now, what's interesting about CO2, and this is what they never tell you, is that CO2 will absorb incoming radiation as well. So of that radiation, on average, 341 watts per square metre a day, but that will obviously increase in the middle of the day if it's hot, and then at night it goes back to 0. About 8% of it is ultraviolet, 44% is visible, and about 44% is infrared, right? So ultraviolet's up over here. Ultraviolet can cause some cancer, skin cancer, because it's very high frequency, very narrow, and it can knock out an electron and stuff. Hence my spots on my face tonight, because that's the reason for these spots is I'm currently putting cream on white cause some skin cancer. But long story short, CO2 has vibrational frequencies. And Larry Marshall, you might have seen a clip I put out about a month ago, the head of CSIRO admitted to me in estimates that CO2 has 4 vibrational frequencies, 1 to 2.8 microns, which is incoming radiation, has a symmetrical vibration of 4.3 microns, and then it has 2 vibrational frequencies at 15 microns, which is the outgoing radiation. But here's the thing, thanks to Max Planck, E equals hV, right, which is the energy of a wavelength inversely proportional to the width of its wavelength, we know that the energy of a wavelength of 2.8 microns is 5 times stronger. So the incoming radiation absorbed by CO2 is 5 times stronger than the outgoing radiation. Yep. So CO2 actually absorbs incoming radiation as well. And what's interesting is we know the bigger greenhouse gas is water. If you live near the ocean, your temperatures are milder. So your minimum's not as low and your maximum's not as high. Singapore's maximum temperature, I think, record temperature's only ever been about 32 degrees in the equator, and its minimum's only ever been about 8 degrees. So that's a good example of actually how greenhouse gases actually modulate the temperature. It's not until you go to the outback where the air's really dry, you've got very, very little greenhouse gas, like water molecules, that you get much lower, cooler nights or deserts, cooler nights, hotter days. Right, so you'll get a lot more volatility. So, long story short, at a little, very tiny little bit, if you increase the weight of the atmosphere, you will increase temperature. But we know that effectively it's minuscule, and the whole thing's just nothing but a beta. And of course, we should also forget that the true recyclable energy is actually photosynthesis. And yet again, we can do the maths on that. The weight of the atmosphere is 5.15 by 10 to the power of 15, times that by 0.04% carbon dioxide, because that's a percentage of the atmosphere, 2 by 10 to the power of 12. It has specific density 1.53. You can look that up when you go home tonight. So that gives it the weight in the atmosphere of 3 by 10 to the power of 12. The IPCC has said that the Earth absorbs 800 billion tonnes of CO2 every year. So that's 8 by 10 to the power of 11. 3 by 10 to the power of 12 over 8 by 10 to the power of 11 means that basically every 4 years the Earth will absorb all your CO2. So CO2 drives photosynthesis. CO2 and sunlight gives us oxygen and water and energy. And that's obviously, that's your true recyclable energy. Not solar panels, not wind turbines, not transmission lines, not lithium batteries or anything like that. None of that stuff can be recycled, and if it can be recycled, it's certainly not cheap. And it's going to have a massive impact on our farmlands and our environmental footprint. So, happy to take questions on climate change, but don't fall for it, it's a scam. And we waste billions of dollars. Western Australia's got an abundance of gas, Queensland's got an abundance of coal. Why are we paying? We could, basically run off our own energy. We've got lots of uranium out there as well for, whenever we want to go nuclear. I support going nuclear, by the way. And why do we then pay foreign companies for their renewable energy when we've got our own energy right here. And as I said before, all we've got to do, with a bit of toil, we can dig it out of the ground for free. It's only the cost of basically digging it out of the ground. It's just insane. Have you got a gas reservation policy over here in WA? I think you do, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm in favour of that. I think we should always keep the first 10% or whatever, to make sure that we have cheap energy and cheap industry to keep jobs going here as well. So, yet again, goes without saying, on children, I'm like a tiger when it comes to our children. I do not want the government co-parenting our children. All of this stuff that's gone in the classroom, I hate using this word, I'll call it Marxism rather than wokeism, but, our children shouldn't be guilty about, what may or may not have happened in the past. It's not age appropriate to be pushing any of this transgender stuff onto them. I've got 3 children. If they have any issues, I will deal with it. With my wife, and that wouldn't necessarily mean I wouldn't necessarily raise the teacher, but I will take them if I needed to. I'm not saying I would. And obviously, this is the parents to decide. You might take them to a properly trained psychologist if you trust the psychologist, not brainwash them further. Because I've actually heard from a lot of parents who had said that even the psychologist just go, you can't argue with them if they think they're, And I was actually contacted by a lady yesterday who had a daughter who went through a phase of about 6 months where she thought she was going to be a boy, when she was 13, and then grew out of it. Now takes a mum for the fact that her mum actually stopped going any further. So look, I think that's so self-evident. I shouldn't even have to be talking about this sort of stuff. It's ridiculous that it's got to this phase. I'm not sure if Peter's going to watch this, Peter Dutton's going to watch this, but this is one thing you can, I know that people got scared right or wrong with COVID. Not everyone understands thermodynamics and quantum physics and all that stuff with climate change, but the transgender stuff, I firmly believe that 95% of the population is just going to go, well, good luck trying to brainwash parents. So I'll leave it at that. Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions on any topic whatsoever. So, fire away. How long does that take? Is that 45, 48?
Thank you very much. I'm sure we can all agree that Gerard Rennick is definitely qualified to represent our interests in Parliament in Australia. I applaud him. Thank you very much for your courage, Gerard. And I can tell you we've got loads of people in Australia who feel the same way. I just want to take an opportunity before we go to the crowd for Q&A. Lindsay, do you want me to run the microphone out to people, or how do you want to do that?
Again, Senator Rennick, most appreciative. So folks, just one real big West Australian thank you to Senator Rennick before we start. Absolute legend, Senator Rennick, and let's hope that you're in Parliament for a long, long time, representing the Australian people, and not just Queenslanders. First question will be?
What's the most crucial thing for us to be acting on right now?
That's a tough question. Look, actually, no, I'll tell you what the most crucial thing is. We've got political problems that need political solutions. From the Conservative point of view, we need to reform our, for me personally, I've just lost my pre-selection, and I lost my pre-selection because there wasn't enough Conservatives in the room. It's that simple. And as frustrating as it is to get frustrated with the Liberal Party, and I get frustrated with the Liberal Party, I was very frustrated with the Liberal Party throughout COVID. The solution, we cannot do to the Conservative movement what we've done to our manufacturing industry and walk away. right? We have to actually stay there and actually take back the party and re-image it now, rebadge it now image of, the Conservative movement. Our politicians need to learn to deal with the pylon and need to learn to say no to the media and the bureaucrats. It is very, and look, you may balk at this, but I actually think we need more politicians in Canberra, and I'll tell you why. Is that we haven't had any more since 1984 when the population was 14 million people. I go down my certain areas, but I know that there's other areas that I should be looking at as well, particularly ASIC. I don't do enough work on them, and I don't do enough work with the Treasury and the Tax Office. They're an impenetrable wall, and I've been told that by ministers on my side, but they need to be held to account. But since 1984, we've had the rise of the 24/7 media. We've had probably double, if not triple, the bureaucrats and departments. A minister will, by the time they do 19 weeks of Parliament, they'll have 19 weeks probably in the electorate. They have to still, see their constituents and deal with constituent issues. They might, if they're lucky, spend 10 weeks a year in front sitting at the minister's desk, drilling those bureaucrats. And we have to hold those bureaucrats are the ones running the country. It's not the politicians. Now that's our fault because we need to be more assertive. We need more, greater courage of our convictions. That goes without saying, especially the Liberal Party. We need to fight for our values more. But we also need more confidence in our intelligence because you can get rocked when you have pile on, when the media doesn't pile on. So the biggest issue, I think the biggest issue we are facing is the political one. I think we are now, as I said earlier in the speech, we're being controlled or run by bureaucrats and wealth fund managers, most of whom are unaccountable, and even when you do catch them out, they're not held to account. Well, most of them aren't even transparent, but if you dig further enough, and the Bureau of Meteorology is another one now, they use homogenisation. So the original raw data has now been manipulated 2 times with the Acorn 1 and Acorn 2. They've lifted the increase in temperature from about 0.8 degrees to 1.2 degrees or 1.25 degrees. They didn't do parallel runs on when they went from large Stephenson screens to small Stephenson screens. That resulted in an increase of about half a degree. And they didn't do proper parallel runs when they changed from mercury thermometers to platinum-resistant thermometers as well, which potentially, it's so volatile it's hard to tell. But yet again, you add the homogenisation to the change in Stephenson screens, to the change in temperatures, and that's most of your increase in the last temperature. Explains most of the increase in temperature in the last. But until Craig Kelly and myself, Craig was on it early, but I've tried to pursue it as rolling estimates. People just take it for granted when they hear that the temperature's increased by over a degree in the last century. No one knows that's actually contrived model data that's been manipulated. You did that in the private sector, you have jargon, or in the old days. So we've got a political problem in this country. That's the biggest problem, and we've got to sort it. My advice, and I'll do a call to action now, if you don't like the politicians, if you join a party and you're saying, so this is Ian Goodnow's seat, I'm not sure how many is in his FEC, but there might be 200 people. If you're in the party, you get to vote in that pre-selection, your vote is worth 1 in 200, right? Compared to 1 in 100,000 in the overall electorate. I'm a believer, I say to people, I won't share petitions online. Petitions are a waste of time. I won't do rallies. Occasionally I might do the odd rally, but very, very rarely. I don't want to protest. There's no point protesting on the weekend. Okay, no one's listening on the weekend. You've got to be in the boardroom to make decisions. Now, some of you may not want to get involved in politics, and I don't blame you. But if you don't want to get involved in politics, if you've got children, get involved with your school P&M. If you're in an industry and you're an accountant, you're worried about the CPA's going too low, get involved, run for the boards of the CPA, or the engineering industry, or whatever it is. If you're in a sporting association and you don't like, that the AFL's gone too low, then get involved with your grassroots level and work up that way. But remember this, life is controlled by those who turn up. Quite frankly, I think the Conservatives have vacated the field for the last few decades. And the left, the long march to the institutions, has gone not just into our bureaucracies, they've gone into our schools, they've gone into our corporate boardrooms, they've gone out into our industry fronts, into our industries. get involved. Don't just, sit on social media every week for 12 hours sharing posts. Cut that back to 10 hours or 8 hours and spend a couple of hours at a boardroom, at a P&F meeting, where you're making decisions and contributing to drive a better outcome.
Gerard, hi. Maybe I was going to, you were the in charge of Queensland Bank Treasury. I'm going to throw you this one about housing, social housing and monetary policy.
Yeah.
So take the example of the, now we make 2% of our houses are publicly paid for. When I was a kid, I think it was 20% that we're making. So in terms of printing money and the capacity to print money, essentially to put it into social housing, if you had a go at that, how would you go about it, mate? And just a little twister at the end, I'd love to know what you think about what's going to be the outcome of Trump and Kennedy next year.
I wouldn't print money for social housing, full stop. You've got to be very disciplined about, expanding the volume of credit system. Housing is consumption. By all means, we need social housing. That's got to come out of revenue from the government. I would happily fund social housing by taxing universities on foreign students. Half of the, this housing issue is caused by a high immigration rate, full stop. I mean, you've got Labor trying to, bring in this fund that's going to build 6,000 houses a year. We've got 400,000 immigrants, half of which are foreign students, and the income paid to universities, they don't pay any tax on that. Right? Now, I know that there's an original exemption for universities because they're educating Australian students, but this is really having a huge impact on our economy. But social housing, it's a necessity, but it's not something and you definitely need housing, but that has to come out of general revenue. I would not print money to build social housing. I have no idea what's going to happen next year in terms of the US elections, in terms of Trump, Kennedy. I guess one thing I'm looking at is to see whether or not Biden will be re-endorsed as a Democrat candidate. But who's going to get up on the Republican side? I've got no idea. Obviously, if Trump isn't, if Trump gets through, he will more than likely be the Republican candidate. But we saw it happen in 2020. So who knows? What's going to happen after that? Anything could happen.
Hi, we've all seen the behaviour with the banks lately.
Yep.
And we see Russia and China joining forces now with the BRIC. How do you think that's going to impact our financial markets, and what do you recommend people do with their money?
BRICS, is one to watch. It's one to watch. Eventually, and don't ask me when, they're going to, if they get some African countries on board. It's an interesting one because BRICS have got Brazil and India. So I'm not sure how it's going to pan out, but definitely a threat to the US dollar. But then again, the US dollar, because of the huge volume of debt that the US, the amount of US dollars out there already, that's a threat as well. My fear is, that monetary collapse is often, and I don't want to really talk about this going live stream, but the collapse of monetary systems is often associated with warfare, and that's and I don't want to go any more of that, but that's my concern there. Look, I don't give financial advice as to where to invest your money. I will say this: if you can pay your house off, pay your house off. If you've got a roof over your head, that's the best asset you can own. And once you've got wealth over and above that, if you're smart enough to make it, I always say to people, you're smart enough to manage it. Obviously, always try and hold as much in hard assets as you can. Have some paper assets, but always make sure you've got your house paid off. But other than that, I won't give any more financial advice. Sorry.
Hi there, Senator Rennick. A lot of people are worried about losing our freedoms, control of the media, etc. But we've still got one ongoing monkey in the room, monkey on people's backs, and that's the guardianship system. I know a couple of people that have been co-opted by the public guardian, locked up in mental institutions, and they just can't get out. And this is something that's not going away. We've got the inquiry into disabled people going on at the moment. but they're not interviewing any of these people, and they don't have a voice. I mean, one person, and she objected to the government during COVID, and she went and protested outside ministers' houses and requested that they be jailed. Shortly after, the police arrived, grabbed her, locked her up in a mental institution, and then in a prison. She's managed to get out after agreeing to ridiculous bail conditions. And these people have got absolutely no voice, and it's connected to this whole guardianship system that impacts on the elderly and disabled. It's incredibly arbitrary, the definition of mental illness. There's no chemical test for it, and this is a system that has really been severely abused, and I've really got my doubts that this Royal Commission is going to get anywhere close to it. So would you or any of your colleagues willing to tackle this issue?
Look, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an issue that obviously needs to be dealt with. There's just a couple of, that's run by state governments, isn't it? The state system of guardianship and things like that.
Yeah, it is run by the states, but the current inquiry is being conducted by the federal government.
Right, okay. How do I say this? I believe everything you're saying. I mean, just, I'm new to government. I've always worked in the private sector, but just, I don't know, I suspect many of you are new to government, or at least new to the new form of government in the last few years. But if it's anything like that way they've gaslighted vaccine injuries, and I get a lot of people with NDIS issues as well, and then some of those are sort of very inconsistent in the way people are treated. I've got no doubt that bureaucrats are completely cold and callous to some of these people, and that there are genuine problems there. I guess the hard part for me is I can only deal with these things on a case-by-case basis. I don't know what the proper, I don't know enough to know about what the solution is, other than that everyone should be treated with, respect and dignity. But it's hard to sort of know, look, I accept there's a problem there, and whether it's a question of need more funding or the guardians, better treatment, because you can spend a lot of money on people and still treat them badly because the person's just pocketing all the money, right? It's like foreign aid. A lot of the foreign aid doesn't even go to where it's supposed to go. It doesn't leave the bureaucracy, or it doesn't leave the middleman clipping the ticket, right? So, it could be a question of resourcing, funding, or just attitude. I mean, it's like government, right? I mean, if we had 227 good politicians, this country could be in a lot better state. You don't have to pay them anymore if they do the right thing. So it's hard one to answer on the floor in 5 minutes. Sorry.
Hi, Senator.
Hi.
My question's around conflict of interest. We've got decision makers, whether in political parties, regulatory bodies, that are making decisions because conflicts of interest where corporations have made them stakeholders or investors in the business. There's a conflict of interest. So how do you see a way where we can actually keep those people accountable, because they're making decisions not for the people but for their own vested interest?
Yeah, so there's a couple of angles to that. I assume part of that's regulatory capture. So TGA relies on 90+% of its income from a big pharma, ASIC relies on companies. A lot of people who work in ASIC come from the corporate sector, and vice versa, they rotate in and out. I know that other government agencies rely on fees from the sector, and that they work in the private sector and vice versa. And then of course there's the ownership model. So for example, industry funds that are run by unions, they use one proxy advisor at AGM. So their combined votes often over 20% of our blue chip companies. And then you add 5% for BlackRock, 5% for Vanguard, and they control over 30% of our blue chips. So there's that conflict of interest as well. There's the Future Fund where they had shares in Pfizer, they had shares in Sonic Healthcare, CSL. So the same bureaucrats who've got, so there's conflicts of interest everywhere. And there's a common interest as well, right? So I mean, I want lower taxes, I want to own my house. So sometimes I think there is a common interest as well that's often overlooked. But it's integrity, it's ethics, and unfortunately, because of the system, if you try and stand up and do the right thing today, you get your head shot off. We saw that with whistleblowers in COVID. Nurses and whatever, doctors who stood up, they lost their jobs. I spoke to a lady who, the next policewoman who, early on in the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, that the next policeman hired by ARPA at a red flag to investigate red flag doctors who wrote too many vaccine exceptions, or issuing ivermectin scripts, sort of like, go and get a life, like what are you doing, ARPA? Look, it's an issue, but yet again, you can change this. If you go and get involved in politics, if you're not seeing your politicians stand up and fight for the right thing, get rid of them in pre-selection. That's where you get rid of them. It's too late. By the time their name's on the ballot, right, we've got 151 lower house seats in this country, before the last election, 60 saved red and 60 saved blue-green, coalition blue-green, is the nationals green, and 30 marginal. So 30 people in the 30 marginal seats will generally tend to listen to the constituents if they have to. But if you're a politician in the same seat, whether it be Labor or coalition, you start managing upwards and you stop forgetting about your constituents. So if you don't like that, if you join the party, in Queensland it's $110 a year, vote them out for selection. That's the way to do it. It's democracy is about people power, and because you can have people, you take the issue with TGA, should farmer pay, given they're going to make profits, they should. But, do we change the system so that they pay the government separate to the TGA, so that the TGA isn't impacted, or you have, there's ways to do this, but to do that we need good people in politics. It always comes back to the same thing. You can have good CEOs, I don't know if any of you guys have sort of mid-tier stocks in the stock market, but you'll have good CEOs that come out and do good presentations and have a future plan and release mine drilling results and all that sort of stuff. And then you'll have other CEOs that tell you nothing about the company. It's a black box, you know nothing about it. So, you've got to, and likewise, and you can even join the bureaucracy, and get involved with schools and that. If you're in the bureaucracy, try and get more conservatives in the bureaucracy to stand up to all the lefties in the bureaucracy. So when they're being biased, you can say, no, you're being biased, do the right thing. But it's a genuine issue, I totally agree. Another great one is lobbyists. Lobbyists should disclose how much money they are paid. Right? They have to disclose who their client base is, but I have no idea how much they are paid. Right? So if I get any payment more than $300, I have to disclose all my assets. But we don't know what these lobbyists have to disclose at all. I know some lobbyists who Pfizer was on their books, but I don't know how much Pfizer was paying these lobbyists, so I would have loved to have done it. And that's just one of many examples. I'll tell you what, disclosing lobbyists' payments would be a really big thing as well. But they're another sort of shadow government. You see them walking around the corridors of Parliament House, when you're down there. And look, not all lobbyists, like there's an isolated children's fund where a bunch of mothers come down, and they're, technically they're lobbyists, but they're lobbying for a good thing. They're lobbying for, greater government support for children who stay in boarding schools or read. So, it's yet again, it's like markets. It's not free markets. It's whether or not they're making money or losing money. Well, some people, like lobbyists, they're doing the right thing. I saw a lobbyist a couple of weeks ago about, what was it? Some cancer. That, and it was, and one of them was her own sister had died from a cancer at 37. So, it's not, but still, I'd like to know when it comes to some of the dodgier ones, just how much they're being paid. Because for the genuine lobbyists who are fighting out of their heart, like, don't actually pay for them, it doesn't matter, they're not being paid anyway, they're just literally doing it out for the good. So,
But now I'd like to invite Lindsay up here from Freedom Media. Thank you, Lindsay, for putting on this event. I'll hand over to you.
We are still going to continue with Q&A. This is just because this stream is going over to Queensland. It's getting late there, and there is a couple of things that they're waiting to see occur, and this is one of them. This stream came about because I listened and, in fact, streamed the debate last week, and I heard Senator Rennick go right to the point where he was talking about some documents that he was about to talk about, and I sat him down because his time was up. Contacted his office. This event would not have happened that Kimberly, who would be watching the stream, she's She's, Kimberly, who's watching the stream, and Soraya. If it wasn't for them, I've sent out many requests for interviews, and if you can't get through the gatekeepers or senators, some I never would expect to get an interview, some I certainly hope to get an interview, but they engaged, and if it wasn't for them, it wouldn't have happened. So, Kimberly and Soraya, thank you. I also just want to take a quick opportunity to say, for our team, the Freedom Media team, all the thumbnails, the marketing, everything like that, we had extensive conversations with Soraya in particular, and that was all down to Clayton, who's behind the camera. So he's done a fantastic job there. We have Wayne behind the main camera here, who has come always at the last moment. In fact, Wayne's just come back from Singapore to get here to help out and do this. Thank you, Wayne. Alexandra behind the main desk there, who's been producing everything here, and she is absolutely amazing in terms of what she does. That is great. The other thing I want to say, thank you very much, Alexandra. It also wouldn't have happened, and he's probably not going to like this, but this venue was put on at no cost, and that was through Mike Gray. I'm not sure it's not going to stand up, but Mike, thank you very much, and that is something that I want to say. Rob, when I contacted Rob last week and said, look, I've got something that I'm working on, I'm not going to reveal the details, and I just said, I'm going to need some boots on the ground. Straight away, Rob said, how many do you need? What do you need me to do? So, Rob, thank you very much for all of your guys. Just put your hands up, please. Thank you. And organising this at the last minute has taken a big push. I mean, I've had people offering to pay considerable money to get a ticket, through to people threatening to sue me because I won't give them a ticket. So, and it's certainly been, Rob, we've been on the phone every night past midnight for the last week. So now, what I do want to say is, yesterday, Premier Roger Cook did a press conference where he said in his recent time in WA Parliament that he has seen the bat light in the sky and has likened himself to Batman. I kid you not. Now, we all know, perhaps Senator Rennick, the reason why that you're not heard in Parliament, in your Senate inquiries, is perhaps because you're not appropriately dressed. In that light, not all superheroes wear capes, but the question is, should they? Your staff have said special request that, well, there was talk of perhaps a raffle if we could get you to wear it. But here we go. So with this, hero on the front from Western Australian people and people you're on behalf of those in the country. Perhaps if you wear this, we might be able to get something a little bit better outcomes.
Thanks very much for that, Lindsay, and can I thank everyone who put this on tonight. I really appreciate that. Look, I'm not a hero. I actually hate that sort of talk. The people who are the real heroes are the people who suffered in silence, the people who made the brave decision not to take the vaccine because they were going to defend their right to choose. They are the real heroes. I've been very fortunate. I wasn't forced to take the vaccine, and I've still got paid throughout all of this. So it's I have to say I do struggle with that because that's I don't want to downplay, but seriously that's our job. And what I did is what 226 of the people in Parliament and some people like Alexander and Matt Kenneman have done that as well. Look, it's not so much that I've been, I feel like I've gone over and beyond, but I'll be honest, I was very disappointed in a lot of my colleagues in my opposition who didn't do what they should have done. And that is to defend, our role is to defend, the government and the people. That is the whole point of democracy, is to protect, from tyranny over each of that. But anyway, thank you very much.
I just have a really super quick comment about the rallies, and I understand what you mean that no one in the parliament is there on the weekends to hear us. But I have to say, it's a beautiful place to meet wonderful, like-minded people, and really super for those who are isolated from their families to find like-minded people to make community with. So that was beautiful, positive, and I went to nearly everyone. And so my question is about the constitutional prevention of senators putting forward bills about taxation. So I'm wondering how you would go about doing all your taxation.
Lobby in the finance backbench committee that I'm on. So I'm the secretary of the finance backbench committee for the coalition, and I'll lobby within the party room, and I'll just lobby individually one-on-one. That's a good question. Yeah, because I'd love to bring a couple of bills in just to draft you, but yeah, I can't. Yeah, but yeah, no, yeah, and that is the important thing though. Look, and this is something that's, you know, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And it is very important that, you know, we stay open and we don't isolate ourselves. You know, we have to be, you know, getting the community and get involved and get engaged.
I saw that Parliament voted against actually having a Royal Commission into COVID. Is it dead? I mean, there is.
Look, we may be able to switch one or two senators next time. Yeah, it's not dead, and you know, Labor is still saying it's not the right time. I mean, I'm not quite sure when the right time is. But my advice, to my colleagues will be, well, I will certainly be pushing, regardless of whether or not I'm on the Senate, is that we go to the next election and say, well, we'll have the inquiry. And we have to be honest about our mistakes here, right? Like, not everyone's perfect. I mean, I never got 100%, none of us ever got 100% for every subject we ever did at school. One of the biggest things I think, it's interesting, one of the things I learned early in my career, and best bits of advice that was never given to me, was the only time you made a mistake is when you know you made a mistake and you don't do anything about it, right? We're not perfect. We don't always know what the right thing to do is when we set off on our journey. But it's incredibly important that we're honest about our mistakes and try and improve on them. And that is why we need this inquiry into COVID, overreach or not, because we need to make sure that we improve those areas that do need to be looked at by the government, and then we acknowledge those areas where we should never have gone into. Obviously, the latter is a lot more than the former, but still, we need to be honest about what happened.
Because I must admit, I was under immense family pressure to get vaccinated, and I ended up in hospital on my second vaccine. And it's criminal what they did. And I'll tell you, COVID is a distraction for the energy wars. I spent 36 weeks traveling the world. I had gone to Israel, and they said, you should know what this is about. And I said, I'm beginning to understand. It's a distraction for the energy wars. What Woodside discovered off the waters of Israel, Greece, and Cyprus at the back end of 2019? Gas. What's the last thing Russia wants? For gas to be supplied into Europe.
I thought Russia wanted to supply it.
They do want to supply it. I was in Italy when the gas pipeline was blowing up. The Italians were like, fuck the Americans.
Yeah. Well, hang on. So you've got to be very careful here, because I think the USA is a great country, right? But I don't think that what's happening there, it's happening here in Australia as well. So I don't I'll put you out on that, because I've got many American friends, and they have, World War II, let's be honest, they signed this. So I've got the greatest, but what is happening at the level above, so this is what I mean, right? There's a, call it what you will, deep state, whatever, but there is a hierarchy there, a tier of power play going on, whereby governments aren't acting in the best interests of the people. And I'm sure that former US presidents will be rolling in their grave at what's happening to that great country today. This is not about, I don't want to attack the people of America, because they're fantastic people, but we will, that's right, that's right. And we need to, we don't want to sort of say, I don't want to attack, any race. We're one race, the human race, and we've got to make sure that we work together in a cooperative way, so that all of our children live in a happy, peaceful world. And we've just got to hold these guys that are trying to, pull strings in the wrong direction, and stop it from happening, whatever that may be. Yeah.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for taking my time. You covered a lot of areas, and I'm very interested to know how you're going to, put it into practice and allow it, to flourish in the way you believe. When in the past 3.5 years, we've seen pretty much every party in Australia stick together and have private meetings in order to do everything they've done in the 3.5 years.
Yep.
So obviously they're governed by some other forces outside our nation. So how are you going to be bringing all this dream that you gave us now into fruition?
By basically staying in the party and building up the numbers and getting the Conservative Party to stand up for its values. They're not being. We're allowing ourselves to be controlled by whatever the narrative of the day is. Right? I mean, it's too easy. I've actually just recently looked into trying to sue a couple of people who've made stuff and said things about me that are completely false. And I've been told in the media, and barristers have told me that there's a special path for media. Basically, I've got to prove that people change their mind. Like the burden of proof is on me to prove that I've been defamed, even though it was a blatant lie. Look, it's the same answer. It's a political problem, and the only way we're going to fix this is by basically getting politicians who are not managing upwards, but are managing downwards and listening to the people. Right? Democracy is a grassroots movement, and because we've got frustrated, and in many respects, we fragmented on the right, and the minor parties, they're doing what they think best, but it becomes too easy for frustrated Conservatives to leave the Liberal Party, join the minor parties, which only strengthens the wedge within the Liberal Party. And I'm going to say this. We need the Liberal Party never does well when we let the West control it. Right? We always do that. Okay? We need to have strong Conservative.
Can I just say quickly, you mentioned George Peterson prior. It's just in the past many years, we've seen, his motto being produced over and over again. We're filling the chokes, was his motto.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that we stop, and we stop allowing that, and we make sure that we work together, to make it, to put all this stuff into fruition. And I can understand that, but we need to make sure that the government and people in government start, working together and take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Good evening, Senator Rennick. I have evidence that a foreign scammer has sensitive commercial information related to millions of dollars worth of exports, manufacturing exports, made here in Perth. And I'm concerned that global digitalisation is going to make matters worse. Should we have any hope that the move fast and break things bureaucrats are going to destroy Australian exports and our privacy via digitisation?
Obviously electronic records are a real threat. Is everything all right? Chair went down. Okay. That's a hard question. So digital currency, there's a couple of things to this. The digital currency is like vaccine passport, right? So you have a vaccine and you have a passport. Let's put aside the efficacy of the vaccine. The vaccine is there, you take it, and you get a medical response. The passport is not a medical instrument, it's a surveillance instrument, right? Currency in itself as a financial instrument acts as a medium of exchange. The digital currency becomes a social credit system, is going to be a surveillance control system. Yet again, ironically enough, Robert Menzies touched on this at the end of his people speech. He said there will be more control, not less of it. And I was shocked when I read that. I was thinking, what's he saying? Because he sort of, saying this is going to happen. But I thought about it, and obviously, what he said was right. There is going to be more control, and there's always going to be more and more control with technology. And we can't stop technology, and it's going to make the world a smaller place, and it's going to make it easier for people with massive data banks like Google and all of that to track you down, right? And you will not stop it. No one is going to give up their iPhone today. I can guarantee you, no one's going to walk away. 20 years ago, if you had a choice, you could sort of see what's going to happen. Maybe someone said, you know what, let's not go there. But it's here and it's here to stay. So yet again, it comes back to having people in power with integrity. Because all of these things are genuine risks, what you're raising. But we don't have the right people doing the right things, we can't stop it. And it's a genuine risk, right? All of these things are genuine risks, but how, I can't tell you how it's going to happen or how it's going to be rolled out. No doubt, generally the way they roll these things out is to create a big narrative over here, and then they say, well, we need this as the solution to the problem sort of thing. And then in the end, when the problem goes away, their so-called solution, which was greater control, stays in place. Look, sorry if that's a vague answer, but it comes down to integrity in government and the willingness to defend the rights of the individual.
Hi, Senator Rennick. I've had many long phone calls and emails with your office staff, Stephanie. I am here as the voice for the disabled as well as the elderly. I suffered a permanent injury since a car accident 29 years ago. I never knew that being on the disability support pension and the age support pension meant that the government would pay you money with Peter and take it away with Paul via the public trustee guardianship bracket, which is a $30 billion industry in assets they're financially managing across the country.
Right.
Now, there's no inquiry. There's no Senate inquiry over the auditing. They're charging people to state 16.7% per annum. They're claiming that people over 60...
Well, can you just stop there? So, because this is where it's hard to talk about something I'm not up to speed with. So that again, they're charging 16.7% per annum.
Yes. So the public trustee...
Income from your wealth or the actual...
The assets. So if they've got a house, the public trustee charges that estate, because they're the financial manager, 16.7% per annum to do maintenance and pay the rates, because the disabled or elderly person is declared to lack legal mental capacity and can't do that.
But on that basis, after 6 years, they would have sucked out the entire wealth of the estate.
They run the properties into land value, then they sell them off to their mates, then they lock them up in either retirement villages or Greylands, which is the largest forensic hospital in the state.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm not up to speed with this stuff. So these public estates, are they run by the state government or federal governments?
They're under the Department of Justice, which is state and federal.
Right.
They're not accountable to anyone. These disabled people, these elderly people, there are no advocates, there are no law firms suing them. I've uncovered 10 women currently in Greylands who are being lobotomised. I've seen the scars. No one's talking about this. They're all victims of incest.
So, can you contact Stephanie next week? And I'll take it offline. There's a lot.
Well, you touched on Brittany Higgins, and the basis of what I'm trying to get to is these females, which is largely 8% of females, they have also had an ex gratia payout from the state government, $1 or $3 million. Then they're using that incest history to change their PTSD into schizophrenia to put them under the guardianship administration. So they were weaponising trauma victims.
So I'm having a look at this, but this is going to take more than the 5 minutes we have tonight. So, Steph, you contacted Steph, you've obviously
I'll send her several emails.
She's replied.
She said she's been inundated with these type of calls across the country.
Okay.
And we don't know what to do because we're in Queensland and you're in WA. Well, now you're in WA.
Yeah. So,
So here we are.
I'll talk
and we were talking about accountability of ministers.
But I'll make a note. I'll talk to Stephanie and I'll follow up on it next week.
Or as Lindsay said, getting through the process to actually speak with you.
Yeah.
So I'm a volunteer disability advocate and I'm getting calls across the country. There's a lady in Queensland, there's a lady in New South Wales. I've sent those emails to you and then the ladies here. They're saying there's no one that's listening to them.
Okay, no, I'm happy. I think, there's a lot of things like this that need to be addressed and it's easily, and this is yet again, because the states deal with it and in fact it's always is. So I'm happy to speak to our community affairs committee and see if we can get this addressed and have serious look at this issue. I have no doubt, it's like APRA, like these guys, they become hammers looking for nails, and then after a while they forget they're there to serve and they start controlling. I have no doubt what you're saying is true, and it's just a question of how we go about fixing it. So,
they were forced to have 5 jabs. If they didn't have them, they were the 240 cattle prod was using condoms.
Right, okay, well, let's, I'll get in touch next week. Can you just
Yeah.
get around at the end and I'll get your phone number, that's all right. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for your time tonight. Just curious, do you have any thoughts about the state of regulation of product safety in Australia, particularly on consumer goods?
Well, I believe in quality assurance, and I have, I'm not up to speed on, the quality of consumer goods, but I mean, what's that word again? Planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
It's, I've got no doubt that that's a real thing. But I mean, no, I don't have a lot of knowledge about it. So if you want to say something more to it, I'm happy to listen.
Yeah, just for example, in the US, I think the US CPSC issued a direct. There was some concerns that the US CPSC was going to outlaw sort of gas connections in homes, and we're sort of seeing that in Victoria. So sort of the overlap of product safety with other issues such as energy, just sort of curious in any thoughts on that, but appreciate that.
Well, look, I mean, product safety is extremely important on any issue, whether it's, I'm not sure if you're referring to gas appliances, but I mean, it's a real issue. I mean, look, like I said, I'm not an expert on product safety. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say cars have got safer over the years. I'm not sure about building standards. I mean, I pretend to be an expert on building standards, but I sometimes look at these apartment blocks and things. But that's about it. I'm not a real subject matter expert on it. But if you want to contact my office and send me an email to senator.rennick@bh.gov.au with your concerns and be more specific about a particular product or something, I can look at that for you and write a letter to the particular minister.
Appreciate it, sir. Thanks.
No worries. Okay.
Thank you, Senator Rennick, for all you've done on behalf of every Australian. My question is for a West Australian Liberal Party here today that can relay this feedback. We have roughly 6 senators from other states in various parties speaking up for their electors, and yet not one Liberal senator has been a champion for Western Australia in the last 3 years, when we needed their voice and protection on mandates and border closures. Where were the Liberals when we needed them? And how can we trust you now to argue against upcoming violations like the WHO, Pandemic Treaty and international health regulations, for example?
Tomorrow night, and Senator Matt O'Sullivan will be there tomorrow night. In regards to that World Health Organization treaties, a lot of people ask me about that, and I say the bureaucrats in Switzerland do not give a flying rat pajamas about what Australians think. Right? We are a tiny country compared to China, Europe, USA, whatever, and then Africa has a lot of members, etc., etc. If you want to stop those World Health Organization regulations coming here or being applied, you need strong politicians in Canberra who are going to say no. Now, whether or not we sign up to that treaty does not matter one iota, because we went along with everything throughout COVID when we weren't signed up to this particular treaty that's been proposed. I've already written the Health Minister, Mark Butler, about this, and he said we're not giving up any of our sovereignty, right? But that doesn't mean to say that they won't go along with whatever is proposed, and it's highly likely that they will. So if you want to stop that from happening, yet again, you've got to get involved at the grassroots level to make sure that if you don't like what the Western Australian Liberal senators did, then join the Liberal Party and vote them out in the next pre-selection. There's 300 people in this room, 350 people in this room, whatever. Go and get a membership form, go and get 10 of your mates, get 3,000. I mean, there's 10,000 in the LNP in Queensland. There's, I guess, 5,000 here maybe. And get active, because I can assure you that they get the feedback. If they feel like their pre-selection, they're going to lose their pre-selection because they're not doing their job, they'll start to listen a lot more.
Thank you.
Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me. May I, can I have that written question? May I? Okay, I will give this evening to the representative of the Liberal Party here. It'll be either Phil Twist or Wayne Evans, and they will represent this to the Liberal Party in this state. So we get an answer. We deserve an answer from the Liberals here in Western Australia. They have been absolutely useless. And I'll be making sure, with friends that I do have that have integrity in the Liberal Party, that they will be answering this.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, but let me just put a couple of things on the table here, okay? I left the Liberal Party, I was a candidate in the state election, and I will not have any one of you stand here and impugn me for any of these things that the Liberal Party have done on the watch. Thank you, Rob. You did. So at the end of the day, I'm here trying to make a difference. Senator Rennick is here to make a difference. Phil Twist, our Vice President, lost his job because he didn't agree with the mandates. I lost a job. Please, stand with us. Excuse me?
See how the party treats you when you
No, let me tell you something. You either get busy changing it or you accept that you're defeated. I won't be defeated and neither should you. Stand it, okay? Don't ask me or Phil Twist to be accountable for the people in Parliament who didn't do their job. We will change that. That's what you do. That's called democracy. That's called freedom of speech. And if you don't want to join it peacefully and properly, then stand there and throw stones. But don't throw them at me or Gerard or Phil Twist. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Senator. I found a stunning statement last week from Malcolm Roberts on the whole mandates and the Department of Defence-led initiative, and it wasn't really the mandates and the pandemic response not being a health measure, being a Department of Defence, the medical countermeasures, and a consortium approach with America, New Zealand, Canada, and there's a whole lot of legal frameworks, the Biosecurity Act, and essentially the government's been getting away with it through the legal frameworks. So everything's above board, but it's been not transparent. It's a Department of Defence. What's your understanding on that take that Malcolm Roberts said through that Royal Commission statement last week?
Oh, I haven't read the statement. Look, I think there's been a lot of things that the government got away with in terms of and I'll just go back to the immunisation handbook. It quite clearly says you can't be coerced into taking a vaccine. You need to be fully informed. So I don't know the details. Look, I've asked ASIO a couple of times why they won't investigate the gain of function stuff at the start, and particularly at home to had emails with Fauci where they discussed the origins of coronavirus. Now, the fact that Fauci covered that up and at home's appear to be implicated with that cover up. I'm not saying he was instigator of it, but we need to know what went down with that stuff, right? And that's why we need this Royal Commission. I mean, I also want to set an inquiry because I'm not convinced the judges will go to the right places and the Royal Commission would have too narrow terms of reference. But yeah, look, absolutely. Like, who funded gain function in China? There seems to be links according to what happened with there's been inquiries in the state now. The Republicans in the lower house have done inquiries that have showed money came from the states, and Fauci in particular, and then why it was covered up and all that sort of thing. So I don't know the ins and outs of what exactly happened, but yet again, we need to learn from whatever happened so it doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Senator Rennick. My question, I watch a lot of your sort of Senate estimates, a lot of the hearings that you attend, and thank you for your tireless efforts on our behalf. My question to you is that you seem to hit a lot of brick walls with everyone that you deal with, a lot of buck passing, a lot of
sometimes laughing about the issues that you're raising. Do you think that it's naivety, or do you think that the people that you're dealing with are maybe complicit? I'm just not understanding why nobody's actually. One thing that I often also wonder is why there's no one in the room when you're speaking.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions there. So I'll talk about the estimates thing. Yes, there's a lot of cover-up going on. And, you know, they don't want to admit. Now, look, I'll be honest. A lot of people, when that vaccine was first rolled out, for example, honestly thought that was the right thing to do. And I can live with that because, you know, they believe, and, you know, you want to believe in government, right? And a lot of people do believe in government. And, if, you know, that's the world I want to live in, where we trust our government because the government does the right thing, right? I'm not an anti-this. I don't want to tear the government down. I want good government, right? I don't believe to solve problems by walking away from them and you know, trying to turn the whole place upside down because, you know, it's not the right way to do things, and a lot of people get the process, right? So, I think in this particular case, it's not, you know, it's across a range of issues. The RBA and their gold bars, you know, the Bureau and their you know, homogenisation, you know, CSIRO, and then actually, to be fair, the CSIRO, Larry Marshall, so they've given some very good answers that I wasn't expecting. Like, when I asked for the model on how they calculate net zero, they said, which one? I said, what do you mean, which one? I thought the science was settled. And they said, oh no, there's 40 different models. And I won't repeat what the former head of the CSIRO said to me outside of estimates about models, but I'll tell you offline later on, but it's quite funny. Yeah, there's definitely, that's our bureaucracy. They do a lot of arse covering and they fail upwards in the bureaucracy, and that's how they get ahead. With the, and I had this, people say this to me all the time, why is there no one in the chamber? People are busy, so a lot of the time when we do speeches in the chamber, it's the adjournment speech, so it's after the Senate closes the day, and you get the opportunity to speak on any topic you like. So throughout the course of the day, there's procedures, there's standing orders that we've got to do government business, we do opposition business, there's question time, and there's all these things going on. We watch what's going on in the chamber, in our rooms, while we do other things, or while we're at meetings. So, you know, when we go to Canberra, we have government committee meetings. They're generally towards the end of the week. We have backbench meetings amongst our own party. I will meet constituents. I will meet, you know, people, you know, different organisations throughout the day, as well as still, you know, answer my emails, my inboxes, take calls, manage my staff, deal with electoral office issues. So it's not as though we're not doing our job, we're all at the bar, holding up the bar, and people aren't in the room. But I'll be honest, I'm not going to sit in the chamber all day and listen to the speeches by the Greens tell me that the world's about to come to a cataclysmic end in 5 years' time if we don't do something about climate change, right? So, but I have to watch. I'll often watch with the volume down and just look at the bottom of the screen to see what we're at in terms of speaking orders and things like that. Because those are German speeches. We finished Senate at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. There can be 30 people doing a German speech. So if you, that's 5 or 10 minutes each. Some of those German, you might have to wait 2 hours to get your turn to speak. So, you know, people have got other things to do. So that whole empty chamber thing, don't get worried about that. You generally only go to the chamber when you've got to speak, the question time, and if there's a division when the bell's ringing, you've got to go down and vote. Otherwise, we're doing other things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. If so many politicians in Parliament are lawyers, why are they then ignoring that all laws require royal assent? And why has the Crown been removed from our laws since 1973?
I actually do not give a rat's pajamas about the Crown and the 1973 change to the Constitution.
Well, you should, mate.
Well, I don't.
You should.
Well, that's your opinion.
It's not an opinion, it's a fact.
Right, well, thank you. That's your statement, and you're entitled to that. But I'm concerned about the delivery of hospitals and schools. Having
about the Republic. Do you want Australia to become a republic?
I don't care about the Republic.
Okay,
because I'll tell you why. When the Chinese march up the beach, okay, they're not going to care about whether or not we've got a crown on the Constitution or whatever. Right? It's our ability to stand on our own 2 feet, to feed ourselves, and do those things that matter, right? I mean, I was taught in accounting substance over form, and I don't go down the path of getting, look, I mean, in terms of the see-through and the practical implications of the Constitution, so as I said before, do I want, different levels of government, 2 levels of government, 9 health bureaucracies growing when I don't have maternity wards in my hometown? Absolutely not. So, do we need to reform the Federation and things like that? Absolutely, where it's necessary. But I'm interested in outcomes rather than the semantics of what, symbolism is used or anything like that.
My question relates to just interest. We can never pay back interest. And if we keep if the Australian government debt, because it doesn't seem to be written as the people's debt, it's the Australian government's debt, why are we, like the 2021-2022 financial year, there was $17 billion in interest.
Yeah.
Where's that going? And isn't usury odious maximum law?
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
look, we're at $17 billion, and that's going to get, as we go over time, as interest rates have gone up, that's going to get close to 40 billion, and that's
It's
very
never going to be paid back,
Well, it can't do it, but it's going to come at an expense, at the cost of living standards, and unfortunately, a large whack of that interest goes offshore.
And really, ultimately, it's debt slavery. So we're actually
absolutely. It's
the tax system that we currently have in Australia.
I mean, all sort of. I mean, look. I mean, there's a role for capital markets, right? But it's got to be done in a fair and efficient manner. And as I said, as I touched on earlier before, the situation whereby we've got to pay interest offshore and there's no tax on it, just grinds my gears no end, right? Or where we borrow money, where we issue a bond instead of issuing equity against a secured asset. But eventually you're right. Like if the interest gets too much, we end up drowning in debt. And if we lose our productivity because we don't have enough infrastructure to provide enough, generate enough goods and services to generate the income, we're going to get into trouble.
And we seem to have a really bloated ATO as well. Like Chris Jordan's on $930,000 a year. And
we've got lots of bureaucrats on huge money.
More
That's
than the
right.
Prime Minister, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. And our Treasury, our RBA governor was paid over $1 million and completely botched it.
Yeah.
As did the Treasury. I mean, there's so many people in the Treasury that pay a fortune. Look. I mean, not that this will ever happen, but right today, the Prime Minister, the first thing I do is cut all those bureaucrat salaries below the Prime Minister's salary, not no more than $250 or something. So.
Thank you.
But that won't happen. But
Hello, thank you for everything you're doing. I've got a question. I'd like you to ask the TGA if you get the chance, or the Health Minister. I haven't heard it asked yet, and I'm sort of yelling at the TV whenever I see you guys speak. I'd like to know at what point, given that they have the reporting systems with the vaccines that they do, at what point, given that's their signal, that's their only method of evaluating safety, what is their point in the signal at which they'll withdraw these jabs?
I've asked that question, and I won't give you a straight answer. All I'll say is that the jabs have been very effective in saving people's lives. And I'll probably ask that 3 or 4 times. They will not give, and it's very frustrating, and I wish I could answer your question, and I'm happy to ask it again. They just, will argue that more people would have died under COVID. And they give you this. The world is going to end. We're all going to die from COVID. Mantra. Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. I know. It does my head in.
And I just had a quick question about Jane Halton and that COVID committee that she oversaw.
Yeah.
How legal was that? Because was she in charge of the COVID response, essentially?
I'm not sure. Look, there are a number of bureaucrats. And a lot of these meetings, I mean, Rex Patrick went and got the National Cabinet minutes released after much toing and froing and fighting the system. And the minutes were just like so lame. The whole COVID thing just took on a momentum of its own, driven by the media and daily press conferences. They were making it up as they were going. I don't know what role I know she was one of the players. I don't know, just how much influence. I mean, there was a Target, there was a TJ, Brendan Murphy, Paul Kelly. I mean, Greg Hunt, all the health ministers, all the chief health officers of the states, who can forget Kerry Chan. There's some real shockers in that lot. The Grant Hazards of the world, where, and what's the dude that was up in Northern Territory that was going off one day? Gun, whatever. He just lost it one day. I won't say it, but everybody, he reminded you of. I don't know what role she played. And yes, she had her fingers in many pies.
Bill Gates' girl, basically.
Well, I don't know
Share
what
a
extension of Bill Gates is, but she was on quite a few committees or other things. So, and that's the way it is up there. There's this sort of, as I said, this is why I don't want to pick on, the US or anything. You get up into this sort of hierarchy of bureaucrats or, elites, whatever you want to call them, and they're all scratching each other's backs,
Hi, how are you going? So you touched a little bit about what's happening in schools with our kids, and that's an area that's very close to my heart. I'm wanting to know when the Liberal Party will stand up and really push for inquiry into the affirmation-only approach for kids that are identifying as trans. For those who don't know, affirmation only means that all other comorbidities, trauma, autism, everything like that is ignored and pushed aside, so that doctors, therapists, GPs, schools, everything just affirm. So the moment a child says that they are in the wrong body,
that's it. Yeah.
That's it. And some states, including ours, coming up, will be introducing conversion therapy laws, which will stop parents from trying to get help rather than putting kids onto like a pathway of medicalisation and surgery to amputate healthy body tissue. It will be a criminal offence for a parent to try and stop that. So it's really, really concerning.
Yeah.
So I know Pauline's brought it up a number of times.
And we voted on it last week. And the answer to your question is when we get rid of the weight centre of the party. So Simon Birmingham, Andrew Gray, Jane Hume.
That's it.
Crossed the floor on that.
Yeah.
Wets.
Yeah.
And no Western Australians did.
No.
But Liberal as that is. But yet again, the only way to deal with this is to get them out of the party.
Yeah. Now, I've just got to say one other very quick thing. I've actually just recently joined the Liberal Party because this has been something that's very close to my heart. In Western Australia, the Liberal Party is working really hard towards this. There's been a very big influx in women joining to try and stand up. I'm wearing my definition of woman sticker because we need the definition of women. We need to go back to sex-based rights, not gender, sex-based rights, because there is only two sexes, male and female, and you can't change. We've got schools here in WA that have got kids identifying as cats, and they are being allowed to use kid litter and water bowls in our schools. So yeah, we really need a push.
Great.
Thank you.
If we look at the voting patterns of the WA Liberal Party over the last 5 years or so, we see that the Liberal Party and the Labor Party are both carrying out the will of corporate lobbyists, not the people. We recently had a 22% swing in McGowan's seat of Rockingham, away from the major parties. Why are you not talking about building an alternative that people want? As much as I appreciate your work, somebody like you could be a real leader for something new.
I'm happy to answer that question. I've had many people ask me to run as an independent or go in a minor party, and I won't do it. We can't, I think that there should be a minor Conservative party, but I think there should be one. At the moment in Queensland, we split the vote between Catters, Hansons and Palmers, plus the LDP. Victoria's got a number of independents. The LDP runs stronger in New South Wales. Over here, I think you have the Gap Party, or was there another stronger party, Rod Halton and a couple of other guys. Everyone runs. You've got to be, if we want to get back into power, we've got to be coordinated, we've got to work together. I think the best way to do that is to actually, and one of the problems is with the minor parties, not the minor party's fault, but when we have minor parties, all the Conservatives, like the Liberal Party, join the minor party, and then the Western or the Liberal Party gets stronger and they end up controlling the situation, right? I'd rather do what Alexander's done in South Australia, where he's got a lot of Conservatives back in the South Australian Party, and that particular state now, he's got Conservatives in a lot of positions that are now pushing. And I know I won't name names, but there's now people responding, elected politicians are responding to the threat that they can lose their job if they don't start standing up for Conservative values. That is going to be a much easier solution. So someone at the back there said before, put the major parties last. Well, you'll never govern unless you're in a major party. So if I'm in a minor party, all I'll ever be is a protest vote. I do not want to bitch and whinge all my life in politics. I would like to actually be part of a solution rather than just, talk about the problems. And the only way I can do that, and it's very frustrating and it's a long game, right? You're not going to change it in maybe one cycle. It might take 2 or even 3 cycles. But we have to rebuild a Conservative Party, whether you want to call it the Liberal Party or not. Conservative Party would probably be a better name for the Liberal Party, but it is what it is. But we need to rebuild so that we have people in the party that are going to stand up for the values that we say we believe in. So the Liberal Party values dignity and worth of every individual, reward for effort, the family, all those things I believe in. But we have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Now I accept that a lot of people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated to the extent that I lost my pre-selection just 6 weeks ago. But I'm not going to leave the party because that is the easy way out. I can chuck a tantrum and I can run as an independent at the next election and then I'm done for. Right? I want to stay, I want to get Conservatives in the party, and I want to use my loss as a springboard to say that, this is why I lost, because Conservatives weren't in the room. If I had 4 more votes, I'd still be, running again in the next election. But going out with the minor parties, ever since Pauline started One Nation in 1996, the Liberal Party has gone downhill. Right, because we are fighting amongst ourselves. There's only, there's two, either it's you believe in empowering the individual and restraining government, or you believe in empowering the government and restraining the individual. I can tell you from sitting in the chamber that the left, the Greens and Labor, are all about command and control. They will use any excuse. They loved COVID because it was an excuse, it gave them a springboard into controlling the people. They love that, right? We don't believe in that, and I believe a lot of my colleagues don't, but they went to water, right? And that's the problem, is that we need people in the party to be next time. So Matt O'Sullivan's coming tomorrow night, but if you go to the branches and you go to the branch meetings and you get stuck into them and you start running against them, they'll start worrying about their job and they'll start standing up, because we need to stand up together. Because I saw Craig Kelly get chopped down. And this is the problem, when one of us stand up by ourselves, we get chopped down. Now, I was very lucky when I went. Alex came with me, and we have a very strong friendship. Matt Canavan's jumped on board, and good luck trying to break us 3 apart, because we're not taking any backward steps. And I believe in those 3 guys, and Luke Howard in the lower house. I've got Lou O'Brien, you might know these guys, they're from Queensland. Those guys, Phil Thompson, they are genuine spear throwers. They back me. Peter Dutton backed me because Peter Dutton wants me in the party fighting for the values, because he knows that he can't be Prime Minister unless we go back and stand up for our values. The Liberal Party had its best success under Tony Abbott when he went hard against climate change. I mean, he lost his way, and he'll admit this, when he got in, because the pile-on from the media, the bureaucracy and all that stuff, we've got to learn to deal with this what you call it, catastrophisation and this hysteria that the left have become very good at. But, you do little things like, just ask them, what's the algorithm of climate change? Start talking about thermodynamics. Start talking about methyl pseudouridine. Go and look at the details. We Conservatives, we are the party of rationalisation, rationalism, of empiricalism, of scepticism. That is the stuff that has built this country and built the Western world and built, the Arabs when they were strong. They founded algebra. Right? I mean, it's only when we started, letting ourselves become overtaken by fear and lack of reason that we go downhill. And that's why we've got to draw inspiration from our forefathers, because when they hopped off the boats, whether or not they were pioneers or convicts, they didn't just throw in the towel after the first bushfire. They kept going. And if we're to get back and rebuild this country, we've got to keep going. Regardless of whether I'm in or out next time or whatever, we can't do what we did to the manufacturing industry. We can't let the legacy of this great country and our forefathers down by just throwing in the towel. We've got to keep on fighting. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Senator Rennick. We also thank you with a warm welcome and applause for his time tonight. And I just want to reiterate, I know a lot of you are frustrated, I'm frustrated with what we've seen, and don't take it out on the people that are trying to bring that change, okay? So we hear you. I'm back in the party to try and make a difference, because what else do? You don't give up. So get out there and help us make a difference, and let's look forward to a bright future for the country. We owe it to our children. That's why I'm doing it, and I implore you to do the same. Thank you very much.
Brought to you by Freedom Media WA, where journalism should never be a government narrative.